across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Good Friday. A very warm welcome to Talk Drive. There's lots to talk about between now and 7 o'clock, and I hope you'll be in touch with me in the variety of ways you can be on 0344 499 1000 to get your voice on the air. We'll be talking to Laura McInerney in a second. She's a former teacher and a co-founder of Teacher Tap. It takes the temperature of teachers, and certainly 2 in 5 of them are saying they've been assaulted. This is as classroom violence surges. Teachers usually have a day off on Good Friday, but they may well need it if they're being assaulted, spat at, hit, attacked with fire extinguishers, for example. Also, we'll talk more about the classrooms being filled with unqualified teaching assistants. Could the US move on from the Ukraine peace talks if there's no progress soon? That's what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, their Foreign Secretary, essentially is saying. The trans debate continues, as does Reform UK, setting its sights on power in Wales next year. No local elections there as there are in England in the next couple of weeks, but Wales is where Reform think they could be in power, perhaps in coalition with the Conservatives. Very interesting one there. We'll talk about prisons later on, because prison guards could be issued with stab vests following what happened, that horrible attack last weekend at HMP Frankland. Also, we'll talk about military housing and our veterans, and indeed our servicemen and women getting better homes. Natalie Elphick is leading the former MP is leading a review into that. We'll talk as well about Trump's visit to the UK. He talked about that yesterday, and Chagos Islanders apparently unlikely to go home after the UK deal with Mauritius. Also, the Easter travel mayhem. If you're one of the car dwellers heading home or heading somewhere for the Easter weekend, you're going to want to hear that update as time goes on. We'll have all the traffic and travel for you, of course, on the radio as time goes on. But however you're watching or listening, you're very, very welcome this afternoon, and I want your views on all of those topics as the show goes on. You know me, I'll try and get as many people on the air as possible, whether you're giving me a ring, sending me a voice note, or however you're communicating. The main number, 0344 499 1000. That does 3 things. You can give me a ring, you can send me a WhatsApp voice note, less than a minute please, and then Tech Up Dave will play them out. Or you can send me a WhatsApp text message. You can text me in the usual way on 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember all those other ways as well to get in touch. Smoke signals, telepathic messages, however you want to get in touch, whatever you want to say. This is my show, but it's your show too, here on Talk, and we're going to be here between now and 7. Stay with us. Right, let's get straight into it, because there's a very, very worrying story, and that is about the fact that one of the biggest teachers' unions, the NASUWT, saying that 2/5 of teachers have been physically assaulted by pupils in the last year. This is with knives, with fire extinguishers used amongst the weapons. One teacher who was injured lost consciousness after a pupil threw a laptop at her head. We're also hearing about this physical abuse from pupils in the last 12 months. Half of the threats anyway, maybe not the actual assaults, but half of the threats came from children in primary school, the primary school age children who are assaulting the teachers. This is 40% of teachers experiencing physical abuse or violence from pupils in the last 12 months. 20% of respondents said they'd experienced being hit or punched by pupils in the last year. 38% saying they've been shoved or barge. Well, Laura McInerney is co-founder of Teacher Tap, which is an app that takes the temperature of teachers right across the country. She gets a lot of really interesting and useful information and puts it in the public domain. She's also a former teacher. Laura, tell us, are you surprised in any way by these findings, certainly with all the information you get from teachers right across the year?
Hi, Pete. I'm really sorry. I actually can't hear at the moment, so I think we might just have to
oh right, we'll see what we'll get back to you, Laura. There's clearly a problem with the communication there. We'll hopefully speak to Laura in just a second. I know the top team behind the glass will be on that one, but let me just give you a bit more information on this. One teacher who responded to the survey said, I have had 2 children use a fire extinguisher as a weapon, one at my head, another to my foot. Another said, this morning I was told to go die. I hope you die. Others reported that a colleague was stabbed with a knife and the child had a knife up his sleeve that he took from the dining hall. Almost 170 people said they'd been assaulted with a weapon and nearly 400 threatened with assault. 60% of these threats coming from children in primary schools. This included a five-year-old child threatening to stab other pupils and teachers with a pair of scissors. This is what is happening in our schools today, and this is what the NASUWT is saying, this teachers' union. Patrick Roach is the General Secretary, and he has said that pupil behaviour has long been an issue for teachers, but in recent years we have seen an unprecedented surge in levels of violence and abuse in the classroom. Based on our latest data, says Patrick Roach, we estimate as many as 30,000 violent incidents against teachers involving pupils with a weapon in a year. Many teachers are having to think about how they can survive in the classroom before they can begin to focus on their teaching and pupils' learning. And one of the questions I'm going to ask Laura McInerney in a second, we're just getting her back up, one of the questions I'm going to ask her is really how the other pupils deal with this, because if you've got a violent student in your class or a fellow pupil, or more than one perhaps, well, what about the standard of teaching, and what about what our children are learning? Are they learning to be violent, for example? Are they learning to be horrible to teachers, to threaten teachers, to get their way? It's not just the effect on the teachers who are going through a horrendous time, clearly here. It's not just the effect on the other students as well, but the whole school and the parents as well. Laura joins us now, Laura McInerney, co-founder of Teacher Tap and a former teacher herself. Laura, 2/5 of teachers physically assaulted by pupils in the last year. You've got your finger on the pulse with Teacher Tap, almost literally, given that people are pressing the screens to give you the information. Tell me, is this a surprise to you in any way?
It's actually not. So we do surveys every single day with Teacher Tap, about 10,000 teachers, representative sample, and we do find that the figures are very high. So if you ask, for example, primary school teachers, they would say figures that are very in line with what the unions have released and are saying today. A little bit smaller in secondary schools. Actually, when people talk about teachers being assaulted, one of the things to say is it's generally not big burly teenagers punching people in the face, which is what people think about. It is often 6 and 7 year olds kicking, biting, flailing their arms around. Of course, it's no better for you if you're being bitten or kicked, but it's just to say that the image that this sometimes brings to mind is not quite what's actually happening.
It is horrendous for those teachers, and I'm sure it's putting people off joining the teaching profession, or perhaps people are in the teaching profession, and I know there are very high rates of people qualifying, going into teaching and then leaving after a short time.
That's right. It is not good. When I was a teacher, I actually had one of my ribs broken by a student who was fighting with another student. I was stood nearby. I actually didn't go in to break it up, but he span around and missed the punch and, of course, got me in. And that meant time off work. Now, what matters in those circumstances, I think, is the reaction of the school themselves, who were very, very good. They were very, very supportive. The student did face a sanction, and I felt that in the circumstances that was fair. I was involved in that discussion, and that's what this is about. Ultimately, in any job that you go into, you do face a risk. My dad was a bus driver. He ended up in a bus accident and he had time off work with his injuries. But what we do have to have are good processes for supporting teachers in the first place, and of course to try and reduce it as much as possible. So having, again, supportive behaviour policies, leaders who are communicating with children about expectations, and as much as possible, parents helping out. Teachers at the moment really feel that parents are often asking more of them than they are able to give, and also are not supporting them with behaviour. It is really important that when children turn up to school, they should be being well behaved, and also that if they do something wrong and the school sanctions them, that again the parent takes that on the chin, make sure their child understands why this is very serious behaviour, and then is able to move on rather than causing complaints.
And on that note, with the parents, there are, I mean, you know it, I know it on a very small level, of friends who are teachers who say, you think the kids are problematic, try the parents. There just does seem to be that lack of support. The other thing I was thinking about as well is the other children in the class. If you have a particularly disruptive child or number of children in the class, how are the others meant to learn?
And that is always a challenge. Of course, part of being a professional is learning how to manage that, is learning the techniques for ensuring that children who are finding it hard to behave well are brought back on track. Sometimes you're lucky enough that you have more support in the classroom. Unfortunately, as budgets have been cut, that kind of support is disappearing, and it makes it harder if there's just you with 30 students with a lot more complicated needs, but that is part of the job.
Laura, thank you. I want to ask you about another story. This is about the National Education Union, which its leader seems to be fairly radical. They've passed a motion saying that they believe that Nigel Farage and Reform UK are racist. I'm not sure what that has to do with, first of all, I don't think it's true, and second of all, I wonder what it's got to do with teaching. But the General Secretary, Daniel Kebede, has accused ministers of betraying teachers with a 2.8% pay recommendation. He says, "We will make Labour MPs pay a high political price through our campaigning in their constituencies with parents across the country. No teacher wants to strike, but we stand ready." Do you anticipate more strikes coming on this?
It's a very unusual situation. So just so that everybody watching and listening understands, the way for about 30 years now that teacher pay has been agreed is that the teacher will give a recommendation to an independent board, but also other people give information. For example, the unions will recommend what they think it should be. There's a range of different evidence that's looked at. And then the independent board will put forward a pay offer. At the moment, all we know is that the government, when they put in their evidence, they said 2.8%. But that's not what the offer on the table is. So it's very early to be talking about strikes. Generally, the unions wouldn't be talking about it in this way. Now, what might happen is that the government reject the independent body, and in that case, then you might see strike action. Or what's happened sometimes in the past is the government has accepted it, but they've not given the schools the funds. And this is the one that really, really gets to the teachers. They don't like it when the only way to cover their pay is that other people or other children are having something taken away. So if you've got a set of budget and your teacher pay goes up, but you don't get more money to cover it, then schools will typically have to make other people redundant, be that support assistants, lunch supervisors, librarians, or they have to reduce the amount of resources available for the children. And that is the thing that the teachers don't like. So I'm sort of surprised we're at this point now. Over the summer, though, if that extra money doesn't come in, then we do usually see that the teachers get very, very upset, but they don't love striking. When we've polled on this in previous years, of course, they did strike a couple of years ago, you could see it was with a very, very heavy heart, but they will do it if they feel that that money is going to be taken from the children in particular.
Speaking of money being taken away and resources and allocation and particularly staffing, a Talk exclusive story a little bit earlier this week about classrooms being filled with unqualified teaching assistants. We're talking about people who are perhaps out of work actors, shop workers. There's no reason why they can't be teaching assistants, but actually there's no legal requirement currently for teaching assistants to have any qualifications or experience to start helping children read and write, and it's up to individual schools to set the requirements. Of course, they've got to be checked for criminal records and so on. But is this of concern to you, Laura?
Well, in maintained schools, there is actually a set of rules that say they should be qualified teachers. And of course, over the years, because academies have not had to follow that, maintained schools have sometimes not been following it as well. And this is actually why Labour, in their Schools and Wellbeing Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment, are looking to change the rules on this. So they're saying that if you are teaching whole classes, then you should be a qualified teacher. Some people agree with that, some people don't. But I do think when you've got constrained budgets, you do end up in a situation where schools are making decisions like this because they cannot afford the cost of the qualified teachers because their budgets are cut. And that is a shame. I think to have people who've not gone through all of the, not just getting the qualifications shown there are the right standards, but actually they've not gone through all of the training is a real shame.
Laura, forgive me for being a bit twee and dewy-eyed, but you've known me long enough to know that that's generally what I do. Can you tell me again, just for viewers and listeners who don't know it, the story about the girl who wanted to become a hairdresser when you give her the careers chat? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I do know the story that you're on about. Yes, absolutely, because it is an important.
I love it. I love the story.
So, well, this goes to the fact that I think we can make assumptions sometimes about young people and their needs and what they want for the future. But I was teaching a girl who was 16 and she wanted to be a hairdresser, but she also got very high grades. So I think the school were a bit worried about her. They wanted her to do A-levels. They worried she wouldn't go on to do university, and they sent me in to have a little bit of a chat with her. And when I got in there and I said, you know, they're worried, they want you to do A-levels. Why do you want to be a hairdresser? Question number one. And she turned around and she said, you know, when we came to this country, we had nothing. But what I soon learned was with water, hot air and a hairbrush, I can make people feel like $1 million. And why wouldn't I want to spend the rest of my life doing that for people? And at that point, what could I do? I couldn't really tell her that she had to go and do, you know, A-level some academic subjects and onto university when she was going to be able to take hot air, hot water and make people feel like a celebrity.
I just love that story.
You know, please know, hairdressers, that is what you do, and we support you wholeheartedly in that in the education system as well.
I love that story. Laura, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate this. Laura McInerney there, who's co-founder of Teacher Tap. She's a former teacher herself. Let us know what you think about what she has said. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Robert in Sittingbourne's been in touch and said, when we had corporal punishment in my comprehensive school in the 1960s, no pupil ever dared attack a teacher. And this person's been in touch, TF has been in touch saying, hi Peter, great show as usual. Regarding the abuse on teachers, in view of what's happened in the last few days about the teacher union, this is the National Education Union, attacking Nigel Farage and Reform UK, are they going to label those school children far-right thugs? It's an interesting question, and I do think the National Education Union really shouldn't be pontificating about Reform UK and whether they think they're racist or not. First of all, I don't think they are. I don't think Nigel Farage is a racist. I don't think he's far-right either, and I don't think Reform UK is. Another thought here from Ian. He says, glad to hear your guest mention non-funding of teacher pay rises. I've told you on this point more than once, it's the reason teachers vote for action. Please keep this point publicised. I asked you and your colleagues previously to do that. It is a critical point. That is Ian from Winchester, and he says, BS, great stuff you're doing, except on this point. So listen, we will continue to talk about that, Ian, fear not, and keep us hold our feet to the fire on this, and remind us, Ian, if you hear us talking about that, by all means. We're going to talk in a second about Ukraine. Bob Seeley is standing by because the United States says it may well move on from Ukraine if there's no progress, and John Healey, the Defence Secretary in this country, saying he wants to stop the rot in military housing. I know there are loads of people who care about the armed forces community who are watching and listening to this programme. I know I do, and there are lots and lots of people who serve our country very well, and they live in really rubbish housing. So John Healey says he's going to get a grip of that. The Defence Secretary says that's a priority for him. We're going to talk about that and Ukraine in just a second. Stay with us.
I was looking earlier about this new hub for counter-terrorism which was built in 2021, and this is what police chiefs said about creating it. And they said, counter-terrorism threats are multiplying and the style of attack is changing. Organised crime grows more complex and demands new responses. There is an ongoing urgency to create this hub. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option, but doing an Easter egg hunt is apparently an option.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to Simon and Lynn, who have been in touch from Moira in Northern Ireland, where they're listening in the car. If you're one of the car dwellers, you can, of course, listen to Talk Radio, or if you're at home, you can watch on YouTube or your connected device, or if you're out and about as well, whether that's your mobile phone, your tablet, or indeed your smart TV. Apparently 3/4 of homes have smart TVs, so you can switch on the telly and see what we all look like as well. We're going to talk about Ukraine now, and the US is saying it may move on from Ukraine peace talks if there's no progress soon. Let's remind ourselves of what the US Secretary of State, basically their foreign secretary, said about Ukraine. This is Marco Rubio.
But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well. I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on.
That's Marco Rubio there, says if it's not going to happen, we're just going to move on. Well, Dr. Bob Seeley is a former Conservative MP, he's a military expert and author of Total War, about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. Bob, how worried are you that the Americans pull the plug on this?
Hi, Peter. Good afternoon to you, viewers and listeners.
Hi there.
I have to say, Witkoff and Rubio, I find it very difficult to listen to them. They are not doing their country much of a service by the way they're conducting themselves.
Just for people who might not know, Steve Witkoff, of course, the negotiator who's dealing with this on Trump's behalf. Yeah.
I mean, they are coming out with some infantile nonsense, and that interview from Rubio just now is not our war. We didn't start it. I mean, yeah, we know that, but there's right and wrong here. I do think the Americans under this administration were at best naive and actually just incredibly boastful, or Trump was, thinking that he could somehow sort of conjure up a peace. And I think we have to remember here that there is a war going on, not because two sides had an argument and it's a bit of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, but because Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine. They don't want to live in peace with Ukraine. They want to subjugate Ukrainians, and they're quite happy to kill and rape a lot of people doing this. So we have to understand some basics about the conflict, which I think this US administration seems to have forgotten.
Could this, I know the answer from you is almost certainly going to be no, but could this actually help galvanise action and say to the parties involved, let's get a move on with this?
No, because the Ukrainians want peace, but Putin doesn't. And that's the fundamental problem, that until such time as Russia has exhausted itself and Putin doesn't have more money to spend and more soldiers to send, this war is likely to continue. The only reason it's not going to continue is if Putin wants to take a breather for 6 months or 18 months or up to 2-3 years and then restart it once he's rearmed and once he hasn't had 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 casualties in a year. So if he needs to build up manpower to continue again, he will. But otherwise, Putin has never recognized Ukraine. Ukrainians want their independence. They don't want to live within a Russian state, and there's a fundamental impasse here. And so when Trump says this war wouldn't have happened if I'd been president, it's just simply nonsense. And there was still a Cold War of sorts, or sometimes a hot war, when he was president as well. So he didn't solve the conflict back then, and he hasn't solved it now.
Dmitry Peskov, who's the Kremlin spokesman and has been for many, many years, said the negotiations taking place are quite difficult. The Russian side is striving to reach a peace settlement in this conflict to ensure its own interests and is open to dialogue. We know that Russian strikes on Ukraine are continuing. Today, for example, Zelensky said in a post on X on Twitter that Russia had launched a volley of missile attacks that killed 2 people. How serious do you think the Russians are about wanting some level of peace here?
I mean, I don't think they are, because whenever they say, well, of course, we'll talk, and then they flatter Trump and play the psychological game, which seems to make sort of Trump very sort of psychologically dependent on Putin in some way. But when you then say to the Russians, what do you want? It comes down to the same thing time and time again. They don't want Zelensky. They want to denazify Ukraine, which basically means prevent people who want Ukrainian independence from being in power. They want to put in a Russian puppet who is probably going to be a bit of a fascist himself or herself. And they want to de-arm Ukraine, so the next time they invade, there won't be any Ukrainian army to stop them. So the problem is the Russian demands have never really changed. They want Ukraine to be part of another country, their country, and Ukrainians don't want that and are fighting and dying in quite large numbers to defend themselves. And the Russians are dying in much larger numbers to try to invade that country, and probably about 900,000 dead and injured so far on the Russian side, which is a truly extraordinary figure.
But what do you make of this agreement, this memorandum of intent stating the intention to establish an investment fund for Ukraine's reconstruction as part of an economic partnership agreement? Is that a major thing that you think is significant? What do you make of it?
I think it's, look, if it works, it's really important. But again, it slightly depends what sort of deal is being discussed. I mean, the Trump deal about the extracting of minerals from Ukraine was a pretty unpleasant deal, and it seemed to be not so much a deal with the US, but a deal with him personally. So I think there are all sorts of ethical questions about that. But of course, Ukraine needs a reconstruction deal. Ukraine wants to reconstruct as it's fighting this war, and needs to, because it needs to keep its economy going, because at the outset of the war, its economy collapsed by 30%. So if you have a fair and reasonable deal and a reconstruction deal, preferably using either the interest from seized Russian assets or seized Russian assets themselves, that is definitely the way forward. But again, it depends what's in the detail. And if the detail is just simply, Trump and his cronies making a lot of money out of minerals, it doesn't really help anybody.
Can I ask you briefly on two other stories that I'm sure you have an opinion on? One of them is that the unlikelihood of Mauritius returning any Chagosians to their homeland once the islands are ceded by Britain. Now, to me, that doesn't strike me as a huge surprise, given that many of them have been in Mauritius for many years to come, many years previously. But those 1,500 or so people and their descendants living in pretty bad conditions in Mauritius, this just doesn't seem to be fair to the Chagosians.
Peter, it's not fair at all. But I mean, the one, what's remarkable is that the Labour Party does tend to bang on about reparations and slavery and the unfairness of history. And then we've got a chance to do something about it by listening, for example, to the Chagosians who don't want the Mauritian deal. They seem to be ignoring them. So for me, sadly, there's no surprise here at all. This government hasn't listened to the Chagosians, and they should do. The Chagosians don't want their islands going to Mauritius. They want them staying as part of the UK, but they probably want a better deal. And actually, I think they're right to argue for that. And I think we've been right to listen, and I wish the government was listening, and I wish the government would use this as an excuse to tear up this absurd deal over the Chagos Islands and the Diego Garcia Air Base. Sadly, there seems very little likelihood that that is happening, and it is yet another litany of failure from this government.
Just here at home, perhaps I can take your temperature on John Healey's pledge to stop the rot in military housing. This is the Defence Secretary saying there's going to be a new consumer charter aiming to improve living conditions for personnel and their families. I mean, we all know, and we've all seen those pictures of the horrible, often, not always, but often horrible homes in which our brave men and women who fight for this country and serve this country are expected to live in. Will this change things from John Healey, do you think?
Yeah, possibly. And look, just to prove I'm not just sort of being sort of biased for the sake of it, there are a few decent cabinet ministers, and to give credit to John Healey, who's on the right of the Labour Party, he's undoubtedly better than an awful lot of them, and he's an intelligent man, and his heart's in the right place, and I think he does want to defend our armed forces and provide a better deal. His problem is he's probably not listened to enough in the cabinet. So there are some good people out there on Labour side, and John Healey is probably one of them. We were investing money. We need to be investing more, because the state of armed forces accommodation is not great. The problem is you can come out with all the charters that you want, but we need actually to provide funding and housing, funding for the housing. And if so much of your defence uplift is going on the 9 billion to Chagos, you haven't got those hundreds of millions, those billions to invest on improving accommodation. So it's a question of actually the right priorities, and the right priorities is that we're getting a pay rise for the armed forces, which is very sensible. I would dramatically increase reservist bounty. If you want to encourage reservists to stay in, if you want to encourage more reservists in, you pay them better, and you increase the annual bounty that all reservists get every year, and then you can build up your reserve by good quality training, better conditions, a bit better pay, and that's the way forward. So these things things are going in the right direction when it comes to pay. The housing stuff, okay, charters are charters, but they need to actually deliver. And the problem is they're spending money on the wrong things, whether it's 10 billion in third world or developing world climate change, whether it's 9 billion to the Chagos Islands, etc., etc. We need to be spending it in this country on things that are important to our people, not on silly politically correct virtue signalling projects that the government has. But Healy's in the right place and he needs to be given the funding to do it.
Bob, thank you. That's Dr. Bob Seeley there, former Conservative MP, military expert, author of Total War, which is about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. Thank you to Mark, who's been in touch and says, "Hi Peter, I visited my nephew at RAF Beeston last year. He was housed in an accommodation block. I was appalled at the condition of the building. The guys keep their individual rooms clean and tidy, but the shower block was disgusting. Plaster was falling off the walls. The floor was rotting. Clearly it hadn't been decorated or refurbished for 20 years. The condition of the block, I'm sure, wouldn't pass safety standards. I guarantee that the government would house illegal immigrants in better conditions." Karen says, "I gave up working at a school after being told to F off numerous times a day. Poor senior leadership on behaviour, and a parent who came to a parents' evening with swear words written on her t-shirt. No one spoke to her about it," says Karen. Dallas says, "Afternoon Peter, with no discipline in many homes these days and teachers not allowed to impose suitable disciplinary measures at schools, is it any surprise there's bad behaviour in the classroom?" It's a very fair point. And Rupert's been in touch and says, "Me and my 12-year-old daughter are on the way to Brittany. I hope you have a nice time and hope it's a smooth journey." Rupert, many people of course heading off for the Easter weekend. I'm listening to the radio and she had her earbuds in. When she heard it was you on the radio, she took out her earbuds and said, "Dad, can you turn up the Catman?" She remembers Cat of the Week. So thank you to Rupert and indeed his 12-year-old daughter, and I wish you a very, very happy Easter and a lovely trip to Brittany. In just a second, we are going to talk to Mark Stevens, who's a human rights lawyer, about the scramble to ensure that so many public bodies actually implement the law. The Supreme Court's decision a couple of days ago now, the Equalities Watchdog says organisations may need to provide neutral third spaces for trans people. We'll talk about that in just a second. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, the fallout continues in regard to the decision of the Supreme Court a couple of days ago in regard to trans men and trans women. Men are men, women are women. Very sensible and common sense, many people would argue. Now, the Equalities Watchdog, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, has been inundated with businesses and public bodies saying, what do we do? How do we deal with this? How do we implement the law? And its head, Baroness Faulkner, says the landmark judgment has brought clarity and meant trans women could no longer take part in women's sport or be on single-sex wards, and that changing rooms must be based on biological sex. The Times newspaper has spoken to loads of different organisations, NHS Trust, huge companies as well, women's charities, appearing to be reaffirming their commitment to transgender rights after the judgment. Of course, we know that trans people don't have any fewer rights than they had previously. It's just that they'll either be treated as men or women. But now there is a call for businesses and public bodies may need, some argue, to provide neutral third spaces to accommodate trans people. That is what Baroness Faulkner has said in the wake of Wednesday's ruling. Mark Stevens is a human rights lawyer and joins me now. Mark, thank you for joining me this afternoon. What is a third space? What does that actually mean, and how can that be created, and how can that mean that the law is actually properly implemented, do you think?
Well, I think, for example, with changing rooms and lavatories and things, it will be a gender neutral space. So people of all genders can go into those spaces. I think one of the most compelling points was a situation where changing rooms, women often felt challenged by having trans men in the changing room changing with them. And perhaps one understands that not everyone would welcome that. And so essentially this has been a fairly straightforward and, as you say, pretty obvious ruling. And I think it's probably helpful to just remember that gender recognition certificates were only sort of brought in 2007, and the Equalities Act 2010 was brought in without really having any reference to gender recognition certificates. It was basically a consolidating piece of legislation of anti-discrimination cases, anti-discrimination legislation going back to the 1970s and the 1990s, when this sort of trans issue wasn't at the forefront as it is now. So I think it's clear that that was where this dispute was going to come out. I think, now it's clear that under even the Equalities Act, there's no permission to discriminate against trans folk on the basis of their reassignment. But it does mean that the other rights of other individuals are not going to be eroded to permit another group to come into the middle. And the only logical solution to that is essentially third spaces.
Do you think people have got this and understood this? I mean, the Health Minister, for example, Karen Smith, was asked on Times Radio yesterday morning by my colleague Callum MacDonald to clarify 4 times which changing room trans women should use in light of the Supreme Court judgment. She said it was important that a trans woman or a trans man also has dignity in their use of public spaces. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that necessarily, but I do wonder whether the government gets this and whether lots of other public bodies that are clamouring, as I'm sure they would because they want clarity on the law, the Equality and Human Rights Commission needs to get its act together quite quickly and make things very, very clear in terms of their interpretation of what the Supreme Court has done, I would argue. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's going to be almost inevitably some sort of satellite litigation where people get it wrong. But hopefully people of goodwill will be working together to try and make this happen. We've already, most of us, seen those signs on toilet doors, for example, which have one leg for a trouser and half of a skirt, which are open to all genders. As a consequence of that, I think we're going to see more of those spaces. So we will see, for example, a changing space, which has that symbol on it, as opposed to one which is just for biological males and biological females. But, as with all changes in the law, or clarifications in the law, people will have different interpretations and the different circumstances are going to manifest differently. I think that's the problem, and that's why we're going to get these third spaces. So what happens in shopping malls or any other place, I think is going to reveal itself in time.
I suppose the question is, what happens if there isn't space for the third spaces? Do we have a lot of different organisations saying, well, actually, we don't have room for these third spaces, and what we're going to do is make more unisex spaces, for example? Loads of people don't like those. Lots of people don't like changing rooms that are, individual cubicles and everybody goes in, or indeed toilets where everybody goes in. And I wonder if you're a business, or if you are someone running some sort of public facility, well, you might just say, we'll make it all unisex, and actually that would be compliant to the law, but also you're actually annoying and not pleasing very many people, including people who may have fought or had strong feelings on this particular issue.
I think that's right, Peter. But I think what we will actually see is, for example, exclusively male and female spaces, and perhaps some of those which are currently exclusively biological male or biological female spaces will be made into the gender neutral or gender agnostic spaces. So I do think that that is what is going to happen, and it might just cut down on the number of spaces that are available, but it is going to come at a cost. And I think that's part of the challenge in an increasingly challenged environment. And I think we're also seeing a gentle swing towards how we deal with this. We see this with, for example, sporting bodies which have decided that people who are biologically no longer the same sex as they present are now being excluded. I think, sort of athletics, cycling, aquatics have all come up to that conclusion. I think others will too. But undoubtedly, there's going to be challenges in the implementation. But I think one thing you can say for the Supreme Court is that they've grasped the nettle and made some very clear guidance. And now it's just up to individuals to adapt it to their circumstances.
Mark, thank you. That's Mark Stevens, who's a human rights lawyer. Appreciate you joining me on the show this afternoon. Trevor's been in touch from Harrow and says, good afternoon, Peter. When it comes to teaching discipline, it's been going down the pan since the late 70s when teachers started to become the pupil's friend rather than a source of learning and discipline. Well, let me tell you, Trevor, I was educated in the 80s and there were quite a few teachers who were definitely not my friend. In 1979, one of my teachers, called Mrs. Groves, was quite elderly, but she used to terrify us just by putting her glasses at the end of her nose and looking at me. I was quite a large lad, but we turned into a quivering wreck if she told me off. I blame most of this on what used to be called the National Union of Teachers and their mad left-wing policies. Trevor, that may well be part of it, but what about the parents as well? There are quite a few people who put their glasses on the end of the nose and look quite intimidating, certainly. So breaking news now on Talk, and that is that Sean Combs, who you may know better as Diddy, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, however you want to call him, his legal team has requested a 2-month delay for his federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial, citing delayed access to critical evidence and new charges. That is Sean Diddy Combs, his legal team requesting a 2-month delay for his federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial. That's just broken in the last few minutes. They're citing delayed access to critical evidence and new charges. I'm fairly sure that's happening in New York. Certainly there is a lot of controversy around that case, but Sean Combs is requesting that 2-month delay. We will see whether he gets it, and of course if a decision is made on that today, we will let you know here on Talk. We're going to discuss in a minute Reform UK. They're in talks with Liz Truss, apparently, as they set their sights on the Senedd in Wales. There is a lot of change coming up in Wales politically. There are currently 60 members of the Welsh Assembly, or Senedd, and that's going up to, I think, 92. So big changes could be afoot. They use a proportional system as well. So could Reform UK actually be in power there in some way? And what's Liz Truss got to do with it? We're going to find out from the doyen of pollsters, Professor Sir John Curtis, will join me next here on Talk.
I was looking earlier about this new hub for counter-terrorism which was built in 2021, and this is what police chiefs said about creating it. And they said Counter-terrorism threats are multiplying and the style of attack is changing. Organised crime grows more complex and demands new responses. There is an ongoing urgency to create this hub. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option, but doing an Easter egg hunt is apparently an option.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Angela's been in touch and says in Guildford Shopping Centre, that's in Surrey, there is a ladies, gents and a third room for gender neutral and disabled. It's been like that for over a year. Surely, Peter, a fully transitioned man and woman can safely use the ladies or gents. Anyone not fully transitioned or a bloke with a beard on a dress uses the gents. It's not rocket science. Unisex toilets are disgusting. Yeah, but it's whether those people choose to do that and what you can do if they don't as well, Angela. So I mean, I basically agree with you, but also it's a big issue in regard to actually implementing that and what the law is around that, which I think has been clarified this week. Rotten Lass says, if there's a third space, does that mean that trans men and trans women use them together? That means mixed sex facilities. It doesn't solve the problem. It is not thought through, and Mark Stevens is not making sense, says Rotten Lass. Rotten, of course, in Swindon, just outside Swindon. I actually lived there for a very short space of time in 2019. Professor Sir John Curtis is Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde and joins me now because Reform UK are in talks with Liz Truss and setting their sights on the Senate in Wales. John, great to have you with us. And this is a very interesting one because I wonder how well you think Reform UK could actually do in Wales. The election's, of course, not until next year for the Senate, but it's changing its composition in quite a big way, isn't it?
Well, Wales, of course, has always been relatively good territory for Eurosceptics and Eurosceptic parties. The previous major party, UKIP, has had quite considerable representation in the Senate, that's the Welsh Assembly, in the past. At the moment, a couple of relatively recent opinion polls for the election that will take place next year put Reform at about 24%, which, by the way, is pretty much in line with where Reform are at in the UK-wide opinion polls at the moment. Now, Wales has got a proportional representation election system at the moment. It's changing that system. It's actually going to be somewhat more proportional. And the truth is that 24% is not on its own going to be enough to take Reform into power in Cardiff. Actually, what the message of the opinion polls basically at the moment is that there are 4 parties that are likely to get representation in the next Senate. Labour still look as though they'll be the largest party, but not having nearly half the seats in the way that they do at the moment, running at around 27%. Plaid, who of course do relatively well in assembly elections, they're running at about 24, the same as Reform. And then we've got the Conservatives running at 16, and at the moment both the Liberal Democrats and the Greens could end up not getting anything at all in the new system. Now, the truth is Plaid Cymru are not going to pave the way for Reform to be able to form an administration in Cardiff. Neither are Labour, but Plaid and Labour together may well be willing to reach another agreement. They have in the past had agreements about running Cardiff. It would be an agreement, I think, where probably Plaid would have to be part of a formal coalition rather than just a confidence and supply arrangement. But at the moment, if the polls continue as they are, they would have the numbers to form administration. Reform would have to look to a deal with the Conservatives, and with the Conservatives only running out 16%, frankly, the numbers would not be there. So the truth is, Nigel Farage's party, if they're going to get into a position where they might be able to form an administration in Cardiff, are going to have to eat into the Labour-Plaid Cymru duopoly rather than squeezing the Conservative vote further, which is what Reform tend to find it easiest to do.
It seems to be unlikely. I mean, certainly it's naive, and I'm sure you would counsel against simply saying that Reform UK voters or take voters away from the Conservatives. Yes, they do. They take some votes away from Labour and other parties as well, but predominantly they do what I mentioned. In terms of 24%, do you think that's a high watermark for them, or can they go further? Because if you look at some of the favourability ratings, for example, of some senior people within Reform, for example, Nigel Farage, there are lots of people who really like him, but there are even more people who can't stand him.
Yes, well, I think the truth is that certainly the evidence of the British polls, which of course are just so much more regular, is that Reform seemed to have peaked at around 24-25%, and that's really seemed to happen around the middle of February. No sign of it going back. That just seems to be where they have reached. And the truth is, I think, history suggests that Reform are likely to do more or less as well in Wales as their current GB-wide standing. So to that extent, at least, yes, they're probably, for the time being, at least peaked. You have to understand that Reform are, for the most part, picking up support amongst those who would vote to stay out of the European Union. That's just over 40% of the electorate now, so there is therefore potentially room for further growth. But you can see that ultimately Reform are appealing to a niche market. And it's certainly, you're right, they are picking up some votes off Labour now in the way that they weren't before the UK general election, but they still find that more difficult than picking up votes off the Conservatives. So further progress, at least beyond the 24-25% mark in the Senate election and indeed across the UK as a whole, that at the moment looks not necessarily impossible, but certainly I think Reform would probably need to be able to widen their appeal and to be able to eat much more into Labour support they're doing at the moment. I think that, to be honest, means perhaps focusing a little bit less on Brexit, a little bit less on immigration, rather more on the state of the economy, and perhaps also dealing with some of the attacks that Labour are currently engaged in, particularly in the parliamentary by-election that's currently going on in Runcorn, over what Nigel Farage has suggested about the NHS. Nigel Farage has suggested maybe we should move to an insurance system. That could still mean that you get treatment free at the point of need, but it is different from funding it through the current tax system. And at the moment, at least, public opinion still seems to be rather wedded to the current system. So that's something also where Reform are going to have to work on part of their broader policy programme, I think, if they're going to get beyond where they are at the moment, both in Wales and across the UK as a whole.
We see a huge surge of support and significant and consistent opinion polls for Reform UK. I just wonder what your thought in regard to the local elections in England coming up is, because that's happening in a couple of weeks' time. Reform UK famously doesn't have that good a ground game necessarily. It's been a very sort of top-down party. They did break through, of course, at the last election in the last general election, getting 5 MPs elected, now down to 4 with Rupert Lowe leaving. But how well do you think they and the other parties will do in the local elections based on the projections you have seen, John?
Well, the honest truth is, Peter, is that these local elections coming up in some of England on the 1st of May will indeed be a crucial test of whether or not the Reform UK do now have the beginnings of a decent ground campaign. One thing they've certainly achieved, they are fighting virtually every single one of the 1,641 seats. It's the first time, even UKIP back in 2013, 2014, were only able to put up candidates in about 75% of the seats at the height of their popularity. So Reform has certainly passed the first test. They've been able to find local candidates to stand everywhere. Just how well they will do given their current popularity in terms of seats, that is the big uncertainty. They might, particularly if they do start campaigning effectively locally in some places, pick up quite a few hundred seats, primarily at the expense of the Conservatives. A lot of those wins, if they win, I think they will be with very narrow majorities. But equally, it's also possible that they might just find out that they just lose out everywhere. Labour just tipping them, the Conservatives just tipping them, or the Democrats just tipping them. So I think the outcome in terms of seats is very, very uncertain, because that relatively evenly spread Reform vote at 25%, well, it could just begin to really turn into seats, but could still also be not quite enough. So we'll be looking to those local election results to really see whether or not Reform do actually have that local campaigning ability that will take them over the line in the seats where at the moment you say, yep, they've got a chance, but not sure whether they're going to win or not.
Around lunchtime on the 2nd of May, John, when I'm sure you'll be thinking about perhaps heading to your bed, presumably having been up all night, I wonder who you think will be under more pressure, Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch?
Oh, the answer to that is bound to be Kemi Badenoch. It's Keir Starmer's good fortune that although the Labour Party is barely in any better position than the Conservatives in the opinion polls, these local elections that are taking place in England, well, they were last contested 4 years ago on the very same day that Boris Johnson won the Hartlepool by-election.
Sort of peak Boris, wasn't it?
The Conservatives won a whole load of seats, and it's also primarily in Tory territory. The Tories are defending nearly 1,000 of the 1,600 seats. Labour are only defending less than 300. So it's bound to be the case. The question is, to whom will the Conservatives lose? It's not whether they will lose, it's just how much they will lose to Reform as opposed to Labour and Liberal Democrats. The Conservatives are going to lose a lot of ground. Keir Starmer doesn't have much ground to lose, even if these election results do actually confirm the message of the opinion polls that Labour are pretty much as unpopular as the Conservatives.
John, thank you. That's Professor Sir John Curtis. He is Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde and the daddy of polling in this country. He knows his stuff. In the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, the candidates are Paul Duffy for the Liberal Democrats, Peter Ford for the Workers' Party of Britain, Howling Lord Hope for the official Munster Raving Loony Party, Sean Hulston for the Conservative and Unionists, Paul Murphy for the Social Democratic Party, Sarah Potchin for Reform UK, Karen Louise Shaw for the Labour Party, John Stevens for Rejoin EU, and Michael Williams is an independent candidate. The election is, of course, the same day as the local elections in parts of England, the 1st of May. So that is those are the candidates in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. We're speaking there to Professor Sir John Curtis. No time actually to talk to him about how Reform UK have held talks with Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, on how to take on the blob, the establishment blob. The former Prime Minister has apparently given advice on how to engineer a major overhaul of the state in a sign of how seriously Farage takes the prospect of power. Presumably, she will be advising them that they need more than 49 days in order to change things dramatically in this country. That was Professor Sir John Curtis. In a minute, we're going to be talking about prisons, because prison guards could be issued with stab vests following the attack in HMP Frankland. HMP Frankland is in the north of England, and it is it houses one of the most dangerous, some of the most dangerous people in our country. And what happened last weekend was that 3 prison officers were attacked, boiling oil and indeed a knife, essentially a weapon was used against 3 different prison officers, one of whom is still in hospital in critical condition. It's absolutely horrendous, and why on earth that was allowed to happen is a big question. And now there are questions about stab vests and whether they should be given to prison officers. I think it's a really, really straightforward yes to that. We'll get more from a former prison governor in a second.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Good Friday evening, whether you're heading off somewhere for the Easter weekend or whether you're staying firmly put. A very happy Easter, and thank you for joining me on the programme. Lots to discuss, including whether prison guards should be issued with stab vests following that horrendous attack at His Majesty's Prison Franklin, and the prison officer who smuggled drugs into jail. How much money has he got to pay back? £48. I think I'll probably be okay with that one. John Healey, the Defence Secretary, pledging to stop the rot in military housing. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the US and Ukraine. Trump, of course, taking up the King's invitation to visit the UK in September as well. We'll talk about teachers who have been assaulted in classes, and the Chagos Islanders unlikely to go home under a UK deal with Mauritius. Loads to discuss. Let me know your thoughts about this. 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please if you would, and Tech Up Dave will play them out. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message on that number, or you can give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss here on Talk between now and 7. Stay with us. Just on reform, Alison has been in touch and says instead of all the parties trying to bring down reform, why don't they just do their jobs properly by listening to the electorate and doing what they're being told to do by us. Simples, hugs, says Alison. Thank you, Alison. And I have exciting news, very exciting news. We slightly didn't get all the candidates on the list for the Runcorn and Helsby by-elections. We've got to read them all out again. I know you're as excited as I am. For the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, Catherine Ann Blakelock is standing for the English Democrats, Dan Clark for the Liberal Party, Chris Copeman for the Green Party, Paul Duffy for the Liberal Democrats, Peter Ford for the Workers' Party, Howling Law and Hope for the Munster Raving Looney Party, Sean Hulston for the Conservatives, Jason Philip Hughes for Vote UK, Alan McKee is an independent, Graham Harry Moore is for the English Constitution Party, Paul Andrew Murphy is for the Social Democratic Party, Sarah Pochin for Reform, Karen Shore for Labour, John Stevens for Rejoin EU, and Michael Williams is an independent. They're standing in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election on the 1st of May. That is, of course, the same day as many of the local elections in England. Not everywhere, but in England, but in various parts of England. No local elections in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Right then, let's talk about the prison guards who are, the proposal is anyway, that they're issued with stab vests. This is following the stabbing using a sort of improvised device in His Majesty's Prison, Franklin. And Shabna Mahmood is the Justice Secretary. She's announced a review into the attack. This was by an absolutely horrendous gentleman called Hashem Abedi, who is going, and the Justice Secretary is going to consider whether frontline prison officers should be given body armour. And this is Hashem Abedi, of course, the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber, and not a particularly nice man himself. One of those guards, prison officers I should say, is still in hospital and suffered life-threatening stab wounds. Two other prison officers were attacked as well. They have been released from hospital. Vanessa Frake is a former prison governor and author of a book on her time, simply called The Governor, which is a great title. And Vanessa, my question isn't so much whether these prison officers should be issued with stab vests, but why they don't have them already. Because I heard from someone last week, and tell me if this is nonsense, but I heard from someone last week that apparently they haven't been issued with them because prisoners might find them too intimidating. Is that an urban myth?
No, that's absolute fact, Peter.
What?
And good.
I mean, that is absolute nonsense. Prisoners would be intimidated. Prisoners are meant to be intimidated by prison officers. That's the point. Prison officers are meant to, be figures of authority.
Well, yes and no. But look, stab vests would definitely have helped two of those prison officers. One of them who suffered 5 stab wounds in his back. One of them who suffered stab wounds to his neck and a punctured lung. So look, you go to your local supermarket, Peter, you see your security guard on the door with a stab vest on. That is unfortunately our society.
I tell you something. Sorry to interrupt you, Vanessa. I've worn a stab vest, okay? So I've covered riots and things like that when I was a reporter in Northern Ireland. And we had all the kit and the helmets and all the things we had to wear because there were people throwing fireworks, there were people who might have attacked us, there were people who weren't massively happy at what the media was doing. They were saying we weren't telling the right story and things like that. You know, there was always controversy. And occasionally I had to wear a stab vest under my shirt and under my suit and whatever I was wearing. And I wasn't going to advertise that fact that I was wearing a stab vest, but they were there. And if a reporter on a regional news station can afford one and go out onto the streets of Belfast wearing a stab vest because there are riots going on, I mean that is an atmosphere which is much less dangerous than many prisons, including HMP Frankland, I would imagine.
Absolutely, Peter. You know, I don't disagree with you. The Prison Officers Association has been calling for years for stab vests. The rises of assaults in jail on prison officers has risen year on year. You know, so far this year in the first quarter, it's up 3% on last year to 2,722. You know, we were very lucky. Those prison officers were very lucky this time that they weren't murdered. And I fear that, you know, if prison staff aren't given the correct tools in which to defend themselves, then it's only a matter of time before somebody is murdered. You know, you can make a sharp implement out of pretty much anything, even out of plastic cutlery.
Yes,
you know,
I've seen toothbrushes, for example, that are filed down into a point as well, which is, of course, I mean, the prisoners will innovate, they will improvise, they will attack officers. There's no doubt about that. But I suppose the biggest question from last week, or my biggest question from last week, is why on earth Hashim Abedi, he's serving a life sentence for his part in the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. It killed 22 people, let's remember. How on earth he was anywhere near hot oil?
Well, you know, it beggars belief, doesn't it, Peter? Because, look, he was allowed unfettered access to a kitchen. The HMIP report said that they didn't need to be searched coming out of their cells or out of the kitchen, so that was stopped. This was policy. Somebody looked at this, risk assessed it, and signed it off, and that person should be held responsible. This is just absolutely ridiculous. You know, there are Cat C prisoners stuck in Cat B jails, Scrubs, Wandsworth, whatever, who would love access to their own cooking facilities. That cooking facilities for prisoners should be an enhancement, should be for good behaviour. Yeah. It shouldn't be for the likes of a Abedi in a very high secure unit, a jail within a jail, to have complete access to. It absolutely is just ridiculous, and a clear breakdown in our high security jails.
I've been behind the bars of Wormwood Scrubs a couple of times actually, and I know that it is absolutely no holiday camp, let me tell you. Vanessa, there's another story which I'm really interested in, which is about the prison officer who smuggled drugs into jail. There's a corrupt prison officer, they do exist. He's been ordered to pay just £48 from an elaborate £130,000 drug operation using puzzle books that was led by her inmate boyfriend. So, I mean, this person was breaking the rules in so many different ways. And I remember actually going into, as you may remember, I used to work in the Ministry of Justice as a special advisor, and I remember going into Belmarsh actually with Priti Patel and Robert Buckland. Very sadly, they let them out afterwards. But nonetheless, went in with them, and I was told about all the stuff that comes in to prisons, and the fact that for many people, for many times, I think the rules have changed now, but actually pieces of paper which are children's drawings, I use the term loosely, literally a couple of squiggles, that are soaked in spice, for example, then they're cut up, this horrible drug that makes people like zombies, they're cut up and sold, and that seems to have been happening with these puzzle books.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, thank God she was caught, and I believe it was quite a large drug operation. The Proceeds of Crime Act, I mean, you know, that was set up to take money off proceeds of crime of criminals. But the problem is at the time of going of their prosecution, their assets are looked at, and if they've got no assets, then really, I think that's why she was only given a £48.50, I think it was. Yeah. for the proceeds of crime and £200 costs. But if she's got nothing, there's no point in saying, well, you've made 72,000 and pay it all back if she's actually spent all that or ferried it away somewhere that they can't find. And that's why it was such a small amount. I do believe she was in quite a lot of debt anyways. So she probably used her ill-gotten gains to pay that debt off. I mean, she got over 2 years sentence anyways, so it's not like she completely got off. And I think she'll be given 28 days to pay that, and if she doesn't, she'll get an extra 7 days on her sentence. So it sounds ridiculous. I absolutely agree. But if she's got nothing, then there's nothing that she can give.
Vanessa, thank you. Appreciate that. That's Vanessa Freck there. She's a former prison governor and author of a book on her time called The Governor. So breaking news now, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the United States President Donald Trump, they've held a call this afternoon, and a Downing Street spokesman said the Prime Minister spoke to the President of the United States this afternoon. The leaders began by discussing the ongoing and productive discussions between the UK and US on trade. The Prime Minister reiterated his commitment to free and open trade and the importance of protecting the national interest. The leaders also discussed the situation in Ukraine, Iran, and recent action taken against the Houthis in Yemen. They agreed to stay in touch. Very interesting. And is a trade deal edging closer? That is a big issue. Of course, the Americans, as we've been discussing in this programme earlier on this afternoon, are thinking of pulling out of those talks on Ukraine and the future of Ukraine, the peace process there. We'll keep you right up to date on all of that and reflect on that call, of course, a bit later in the programme. But back to prisons, and Michael in Middlesbrough has given me a ring on this particular issue. Michael, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say about prison officers being attacked?
Hi, Peter. How are you? You okay?
I'm fine, thanks, although just on a big sneeze.
Yeah, good. I think it's disgusting. I'm an ex-prisoner myself, and the prison officers, the majority of prison officers, they're absolutely spot on. They'll go out of the way to help you. And I haven't seen a prison officer get attacked the way they're being attacked in HMP Franklin.
Yeah.
I've never witnessed that. I've seen inmates getting attacked with hot oil, and it's horrendous. It's horrendous.
And people getting access to these things, I mean, surely that's all risk assessed. When you were in prison, I mean, how long were you in prison, Michael, if you don't mind me asking?
I've served 21 years. That's for murder. And rightly so. I was young, I was stupid, I paid the price. I was in the dispersals, full Sutton. I was in Weymouth Scrubs, where you've been, Peter.
Yeah.
I was on D-Wing for 2.5 years.
Right.
That's the first stage life sentence. We weren't allowed to cook food there. We used to cook our own food in kettles and stuff like that. Weapons can get made with anything. I've seen them get made with anything at all. And a lot of attacks happen between inmates and inmates. And I believe what should happen now is with these, and it's not singling anyone out, these terrorists that are in special units.
Yeah, in Franklin, yeah.
And Whitemoor and places like that, they should not be allowed to have access to hot oil to this to happen. That should be stopped immediate. It should be. When I was in Park. That's what I'll portray myself when I first went to prison. Then I settled down, I went to Park Air, started doing my offending behaviour work. I got enhanced. That means from standard to enhanced, I went on to C-Wing, where you can cook your own food.
Yeah.
Everyone there was serving life sentences or not getting out or serving a hell of a lot of time, like 20, 30 years. And everyone got on, prison officers got on.
Do you think prison officers should have stab vests, Michael?
Not really, no, because like what someone said, it might be like they're walking about with threatened. But on the other hand, yes, because that would prevent. That's what happened to these prison officers in HMP Franklin.
They can never be.
That would have prevented that.
They can never be fully safe, though, can they? It's not a job without risk.
They could go for the face straight away or the neck.
Yeah.
So that won't prevent anything.
Okay.
What should happen is, I think personally, I've been to Full Sutton, I've been to Park Air, where you can cook your own food when you're enhanced and you're behaving yourself and you're allowed these privileges. But it's not going to stop somebody who's doing a hell of a lot of time, like this Manchester Arena bomber.
Yeah.
that's not going to.
There's sort of nothing to lose. Michael, just finally, obviously earlier on you expressed regret for the murder you committed, and I'm glad you did that. And you've been very clear on that. Have you managed to rebuild your life? Do you think you're rehabilitated and a productive member of society, Michael?
100%. I mean, I'm always on licence because I killed somebody. So obviously, when I first got out of prison, I was seeing probation every week, and then after about 6 months, it was every 2 weeks, and then it's been every month for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Only just the other week, I've been. My risk has been lowered out to the public. I've got a different probation officer. I went to see it in the chapel. I went, how come I'm seeing you in the chapel? He said, because your risk now is lowered, and we see you now every 3 months, 4 times a year. I still can't leave the country. I can't go on holiday. I've got a baby. She's 3-year-old. I bought a house. I own a Tesla. I've got a good job, HGV driving. I'm at work now. I just pulled over on the A1. I'm going to Bedford. I don't do the things what I used to do. Take drugs, deal drugs, and obviously I made it happen because I was in that lifestyle. I don't do none of that no more. And I've got friends around me. I've got good family around me. And it's about wanting to change. If you don't want to change, then you're not going to change. But prison did help me. Yeah. I learned things. I learned to cook. I got my qualification in gym. I'm a qualified chef. And I've done that for myself, you know. So now I try and better myself. And now I would love to, in the future, and I've been told this by people, ex-convicts, probation officers, why don't you do talks? And I did do a talk in prison in front of 300-400 people. And
well, I've learned a lot from you today, Michael. What would you say to your younger self if you could talk to your younger self? What would you say?
I would say, get a trade. I like plumbing, electrician. Don't go down the route of dealing drugs or taking drugs. Obviously, all the kids today, they're going to experiment. That's, you know, you can't be blindfolded. I've got a 3-year-old daughter now. I hope, like, one day she can come to me and say, Dad, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, my friends are taking this, my friends are taking that. Maybe I can say to her, you can't stop someone from doing some experiment, but maybe I can give them an insight because I've done everything. I've worn a T-shirt, I've come through the other end, and I would like to try and help in the future, even if it's one person, to steer them away from going to prison or hating somebody or having victims like I have, the victim's family. My people, I lost my dad when I was in prison in 2007, and that was a turning point for me. And then 2008, I stopped taking drugs because you can get any drugs in prison. Drugs, it's flooded with them. And I was on drugs from 1998, from when I went away, till 2008, and then I turned the corner, and then I started not taking drugs. I started getting into my gym, and now I love going to the gym now. I go to work, I work hard. I do this week, I'll be doing 90 hours. I've worked 6 days in a row. This is my last shift. I've took a week off now. I've got a week's holiday now till next Sunday. And yeah, I'd just like to say to anybody that's young, that try not to do. That's what I've done. I've had the money, I've had the flashy cars, I've had the lifestyle with all drugs, what it brings, and reputation. That's not the way. That's not the way. Get out and work. Get out and work. Get a trade. And if your friends are doing it or whatever, then change your friends. I only changed one thing, and that was everything. Before I got out, I changed everything.
Michael, very, very interesting to talk to you, and thank you for that. That's Michael in Middlesbrough there. Have a safe journey as well. Michael driving his lorry there. Sandy says, stab vests will not stop boiling oil or butter hurting the prison officer. It's a very good point, Sandy, in Lincolnshire there. Dawn in Chelmsford says, we live in a country where prison officers are not given stab vests and our armed forces live in substandard housing. How have we come to this? And Jane says, perhaps our Prime Minister could ask Donald Trump how to protect the UK borders as Starmer seems unable to do it, says Jane. Well, we're going to talk about another political issue next. It affects a lot of people that we all at this station care about, which are people who are serving in the military. And John Healey, who is the Defence Secretary, has pledged to stop the rot in military housing. How's he going to do that? We'll find out in just a minute.
actually means in some of the key areas. So does that mean, for example, Kev, if you go for an ultrasound or an MRI scan, I hope you don't have to do either of those things, but if you do,
yeah.
Are you going to be protected from the radiographer saying, could you be pregnant before you have an ultrasound, or whatever else the test may be? Are we gonna stop all that nonsense, please, or is it going to persist?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Leslie says the prison officer running a drug deal with her prisoner boyfriend gets 2 years, and Lucy Connolly gets more for hurty words online. Certainly lots of reaction to that story. Some more on Twitter as well. A number of people getting in touch. Let me just have a quick look here. Angie says prison staff should be given PPE. I would also include probation service and NHS staff. I've worked in the health service, says Angie. I've been attacked both verbally and physically, including being bitten and spat at. That's horrendous. Adrian says the talk with Michael was really inspirational. He's a man I would love to have a conversation with. All kudos to him. And Michael was speaking to us just before the break. If you missed it, Michael is a convicted murderer. He served 21 years in prison. He expressed regret and apology for what he did. He says he's really turned his life around. He's got a good job now. He's an HGV driver. And he's got a 3-year-old, and he says that his daughter absolutely cannot go down the route that he wants to inspire other people and try to move them away from a life of crime. We're getting our people behind the scenes to put that out on Twitter. It was a really interesting call, certainly, and there's absolutely no excuse for what Michael did and what he and the murder that he committed. He nonetheless apologised for it on air a couple of times, spoke about his regret for that, and talked about how he wants to help other people turn their life around. So very, very interesting call from Michael there. Perhaps you heard it. If you didn't, you can go on socials, including I'll retweet it at Peter Cardwell, and it'll be on @Talk as well on Twitter. Someone saying I should call it X. Nobody calls it X. Let's talk now about the Defence Secretary, John Healey. He has pledged to stop the rot in military housing, and certainly military housing, as we know in so many different examples, has been pretty rubbish, and there are lots of people who serve our country who are living in pretty terrible conditions. Someone making a very good point earlier on that there are lots of asylum seekers who've contributed nothing to this country who are nonetheless living in hotels. What about our brave men and women who are either on ready alert or serving abroad, actually fighting perhaps, or in some way on military bases right across the world? Well, Lee Buss-Blair is a veteran. He's Director of Operations at the Riverside Group, which is a social housing charity. Lee, this is an interesting one, certainly. Just paint a picture, if you can, of how bad some of the accommodation is, because I've seen pictures, I've heard from people I know who are in the military. It's still pretty bad, isn't it?
It has been. And it's been something that both this government, when they were in opposition, and the last government, had a focus on. But there are big issues that need to be kind of resolved in relation to the quality of repairs, but also around damp and mould as well, which we know about.
What damp and mould, obviously horrendous for anybody living with it. What are the sort of main big issues, structural issues? Is it just money? Is it just renovations? Is it how the accommodation's been treated over the years? I mean, tell me a bit about that.
It's a mixture of all of those things. Quite often it's structural in nature, and it's not just the serving families accommodation where this is an issue. It's an issue in social housing, and it's an issue in the private rented sector as well, which is why it's great that within the Charter it mentions specifically around standards equating to AWAB's law, which is the new law that applies to the housing association sector in relation to damp and mould, and hopefully with the Renters' Rights Bill, the same standard will be applied to the private rented sector. So it's good to see that military housing, the same expectations are going to be applied to providers.
It's interesting, if you're serving in the military, obviously it is a hierarchical structure, and there's a limit to how you can actually go to your senior officers and say, actually, this is not okay, not just for me, but for my family as well. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are wives and husbands of people who are serving who don't want to upset the apple cart. How much of that is a sort of just get on with it, knuckle down, don't cause too much trouble, and don't be a troublemaker, when you're actually perhaps, you know, many other people in society would complain about how bad this accommodation has been?
Yeah, well, I was quite a troublemaker. So, but no, you're absolutely right. Interestingly, John Healey actually held the Labour housing portfolio for a really, really long time. So he absolutely gets housing, and he certainly gets social housing or subsidised housing in this case. So I've got a huge amount of confidence in John. When they were still in opposition, John did put together a commission to look at the issue of quality in service accommodation. And one of the things that highlighted or recommended was a complaints process that was outside the chain of command. So it's really good to see that within the Charter it mentions repairs. It doesn't specifically say, from what I can see, whether or not that complaints process will be outside the chain of command, but that would be a really important feature, because, yeah, even in civilian street, people will quite often be anxious about complaining to people within authority who have, you know, a direct influence over their experience.
Of course, I know people in social housing who will say, you know, the social housing company are going to chuck us out if we complain too much, or people in private housing who don't want to complain to their landlords because they say, well, just jack up the rent. They'll get to a situation where we can't actually afford this accommodation, and they'll effectively throw us out. In terms of some of the footage we've seen, some of the things that they've described, let me read out what Barry in the Ards Peninsula in Northern Ireland said. Afternoon, Peter, I joined up in 1979. Single accommodation wasn't great, but it was adequate, unless in operations or deployment, when it was pretty grim. Once married, luckily my housing was first class. And there can be, as Barry's pointed out, a bit of a two-tier structure there, can't there?
It can be. I think, you know, one of the things that's also... I mean, the housing association sector are really experts at doing this, and even we get it wrong sometimes. And certainly since the pandemic, we've seen a real struggle in relation to having the available funds to be able to really invest in our properties, as we've seen inflation rise, and we've seen the cost of repairs and the cost of, you know, stuff increase.
Yeah.
For us, the cost of maintaining our properties has gone up 141% since 2019, but our rent goes up by CPI plus 1% a year. So the last few years have been particularly challenging, but also as well, there has been a lack of investment in services accommodation over the last however many decades. It's a relatively aging portfolio, and the older it gets, the more expensive it becomes to maintain. So it's a massive challenge, but one that I've got confidence that John and Alcons actually kind of like understand, and will do everything that they can to get on top of. Bringing it back in-house from the private companies that were running it, I think is absolutely the right thing to do. Any form of social housing or subsidised housing shouldn't be for profit. Every single penny that is, you know, brought in should be then spent on making sure that the quality of the housing is where it needs to be. And we all know that it really hasn't been.
Lee, thank you so much. Just before you go, I just want to ask you, who is that beautiful boy or girl behind you there, who I think wants out?
That is Corvus. He's 8.5 months old. We're going through the teenage phase. He's adorable. He's also, yes.
I think we'll perhaps leave it there at 5:30 in the afternoon. But maybe he needs a walk. Maybe he needs some exercise just to focus in another direction, perhaps to the direction he is focusing in. Lee, thank you very much indeed. Lee Busblair there, who is a veteran director of operations at the Riverside Group, which is a social housing organisation association. So maybe you've been in the military. I know loads of people who watch and listen to this programme care about these issues, and I know we've a load of veterans who have been in touch. What was your accommodation accommodation like? Was it any good? Did it get better? Did it get worse as time went on? Tim's been in touch from Suffolk. He's an RAF veteran and joined, I think, in 1985, the year after I was born. Tim, my married quarters had a coal fire with a back boiler and one radiator, metal windows and basic other features. I saw the same house 2 years ago. My goodness, nothing has changed, says Tim, since 1985, nearly 40, well, it is 40 years ago now, because I'm 41 this year. My goodness, you've got to make sure that our military servicemen and women are better accommodated. I wish John Healy good luck in this. I hope that this is sorted out, certainly. And if you are one of those people who is in substandard accommodation or have been previously, get in touch. Let me know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000 and your experience as well. 87222 to text. You can send me a voice note if you want to on the main number, or a WhatsApp text message, just like Tim did there a minute ago, 0344 499 1000. Your call's next here on Talk. We're also going to be chatting in just a minute or two about Trump taking up the King's invitation to visit the UK in September, and that call that Trump and indeed Starmer have been having very recently. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Barry's been in touch again, and he said, when I joined up, Peter, the recruitment sergeant promised I would be in 4-star accommodation. He was right, because I was lying in bed at night, I could see 4 stars through the hole in the roof. Very good, Barry. I hope you're in better accommodation now. Don in Chelmsford says, I managed a district council housing department. We carried out 28,000 reactive repairs a year. We had comprehensive modernisation schemes, and we had a robust complaints procedure. In my view, it is all about top-focused management, says Don in Chelmsford. Don, I really wish you'd been in charge of the housing department in some homes I've been in, to be brutally frank. Let's talk on the prison officers' story that we're doing a little bit earlier, whether they should be given stab vests. In fact, Pete has been in touch from Perthshire, and he says stab vests would help, but you'll always have those from a death cult that will do whatever it takes to carry out death in the name of their religion. In a case like this, the death penalty needs to be applied. In Pete's view, there is no real deterrent, sadly. Good show. I don't think you're right, Pete. I don't think the death penalty should be applied, and the death penalty should be, if it's there, it should be a deterrent, but it's not a deterrent to these people, many of whom are very happy to die in much less pleasant ways than a needle in the arm. If you disagree with me on the death penalty, that's okay. 0344 499 1000. On prison officers specifically, Freya in the West Midlands has been in touch. Freya, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Oh, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yes, I don't understand why they haven't got tasers. Just put those guys down as soon as they start showing any kind of violence.
I suppose what if the prisoners got the tasers as well? I mean, if they had them in their belts, if the prisoners got the tasers, that
wouldn't. We would hope at least there'd be some kind of method of keeping them in the control of the prison officers and the prison itself.
Yeah.
Surely.
I don't understand why they haven't been given stab vests previously. I don't understand why this is a thing. And Vanessa Frake confirming a little bit earlier that apparently someone somewhere made a decision to say we don't want...
There's been far too much consideration to giving prisoners, you know, like reformation kind of. Oh yeah, I know.
Well, we don't want to offend them. I mean, I'm very happy to offend prisoners, especially if they've broken the law, and I think the onus should be on protecting the prison officers, Freya.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't know what to say. I'm absolutely appalled that that guy was able to pour oil.
I know, it's horrendous.
Over prison officers, and I mean, you can't, no stab vest is going to stop that, is
well, you're absolutely right, and you know, someone else pointed that out as well, and it's a very, very fair point, and I mean, there shouldn't have been any access to that anyway. Freya, thanks for your call. That was Freya in the West Midlands there. We're going to go to Epsom now, and Chris is there. This is a story, just before I bring Chris in, I just want to tell you a little bit about it, because this is an inquest into the deaths of 4 people killed by drivers with failing eyesight. It's found that enforcement of legal standards for motorist vision is ineffective and unsafe. Britain's licensing system, the laxest in Europe. 4 people died in traffic collisions, and the coroner wrote the 4 fatalities shared the same feature, that the driver's sight was well below the standard required to drive a car. And when you're over 70 in this country, you self-report whether you are able to drive a car or not. Obviously, there are lots of people who really cherish driving a car, and it's so incredibly important to their independence. But if their eyesight isn't up to it, of course they shouldn't be doing it to protect themselves and other people. Let's see what Chris in Epsom thinks of this. Chris, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. We've spoken before. Can I just I phoned up about eyesight, but can I make a comment? I'd like to send Happy Easter to those injured prison officers and their families.
Of course. Well, that's a very nice thing to do, Chris. And yes, certainly. And I hope you have a happy Easter yourself, Chris. What do you think about the eyesight story?
Right. Well, unfortunately, I lost my father 2 years ago, age 88.
I'm sorry to hear that, Chris.
Yeah, he was a release in the end.
Yeah.
He worked up until he was 82 with his own business. Then he got rid of the premises, but he carried on working home for his favourite customers, putting a towel on my mother's kitchen table,
right.
and mending sewing machines, which was quite funny, because in the early 60s, that's how my grandfather had started the business.
Oh, wow, on the kitchen table. That's a wonderful story.
My grandmother kicked him out and told him to get a shop.
Right.
Now, I was losing vision at 50, just from age. I'm 64 now. In 2016, I had natural lens replacement, and I've now got 20/20 vision.
Okay.
Now, my father at age 85 was still driving.
Right.
And he thought his eyes were fine. But I'd noticed there was a few rub marks. He had 2 cars, one that was special for weekends and one that he generally drove. And I noticed on one he generally drove, there was a few rub marks on it. So one day I said, he was going to home base, so I said, I'll come with you. Jesus, I was frightened to death. It was obvious he was struggling with his eyes.
Yeah.
But he had no idea. He was not lying or hiding anything.
Yeah, he wasn't being disingenuous or in any way. He just didn't know. Do you know what? No. The thing you mentioned, just before we go into that just for a second, the thing you mentioned about eyesight getting better, I went to the optician a few months ago, and the optician said, you need new glasses because your eyesight's got better. I wear glasses for cinema and theatre and football matches and things far away. I probably should wear them to watch the telly, but I don't. But my eyesight got better, and actually my grandfather, who's sadly no longer with us, he died about 10 years ago, aged 93. His sight got better as well. When he was about 90, he didn't have to wear glasses anymore, and his sight got better. So it can change, Chris, can't it?
Yeah, it can. But what I did with my father, I took him to the ophthalmic optician I'd gone to see, and I sat in when they tested his eyes. Mm-hmm. And it turned out he still thought, even reading the letters where he failed getting down low, he still thought his eyes were fine. Right. But the girl there said he had 25% vision in one eye,
oh, goodness,
and 50% in the other.
Yeah.
And it was serious cataracts. So I booked him in. A week later, he had natural lens replacement. and he didn't wear glasses after that. So his eyes were fine. I mean, it was quite funny because he would read a paper and he'd go, "Oh, I haven't put my glasses on," but he'd always be reading.
The habit was there, Chris. Well, it's a really interesting example, I think, of how sight can change. There are all sorts of people, and it's a very difficult discussion, Chris, that you've got to have with people as well, isn't it? As they get older, actually, do you know what, your driving isn't up to speed, up to how it should be. My other grandfather, actually, on the other side, my maternal grandfather, drove for a very, very long time, probably more than he should have. And I was out in the Land Rover with him. Actually, he was a farmer. I was out in the Land Rover one time with him, and I was terrified, actually, at how he was driving, and I made sure I drove the Land Rover after that. But it's a very difficult discussion to have with people because their independence is so incredibly important to them.
Listen, my father, he worked from the age of 15. His mother got him an apprenticeship as a toolmaker. He ended up as a precision toolmaker working on Lynx helicopters. And then as my grandfather got ill, he helped him, and then he bought the business off of him. He worked all his life. He was a proper alpha male. I'm an alpha as well. And it was a very difficult relationship when I was younger, so I was also the eldest son who pushed the envelope. To have that conversation, I don't think anybody could appreciate it. My friends would and did appreciate sitting him down, even at age 85, and telling him, Pops,
Well, you get to the stage, Chris, where you're the adult, and it's tricky sometimes.
Oh, if they live long enough, my friend, they become your children. I cared for him for 11 months while cancer ate him alive, and I still care for my mother, who's bedridden with Parkinson's and dementia.
Well, you're clearly a very good son who loved his father and loves his mother. And Chris, it's lovely to hear from you, and thank you for telling us your story today. It's really interesting how eyesight, we take it for granted if you have it, and if you're lucky enough to have it. And there are a lot of people who listen to the radio who don't have perfect eyesight, and the radio is a real comfort to them. And I'm delighted that there's so many people who are listening today. And this story, it's a tough one, actually, because eyesight and people driving and their independence, it's a big issue for a lot of older people, and you don't want to admit that your driving is perhaps not as good as it should be. On a lighter note, Jason from the Lake District has been in touch to say, Peter, you mentioned that you wear glasses to watch football at football matches. You don't go to football matches. Stop it. Well, Jason, I will let you know that I have been to quite a number of football matches over the years. I know nothing about football, but certainly when I was a bit younger, I used to go to quite a few football matches with my dad and my brother, who were at one stage actually directors of Glenavon Football Club in Lurgan, and I support them from afar, but I think I just reached the realistic realisation a few years ago that football was not really for me, so I don't pretend to know very much about it, but of course, except during the sports segments on this show, where of course I know everything, and it's not just because Ryan has written the questions for me, because he really does know his stuff. But Jason, it's a fair point, but I have been to quite a number of football matches. In fact, a friend of mine had tickets for a Chelsea match once, and I went to Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, and it was really impressive to go there. I must say Chelsea won that day, which was good for them. Right then, in a minute or two, we're going to talk to Michael Yaki. He is a US political analyst and a former senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi, who was, of course, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. There's loads to talk about, including that call which has happened in the last hour or so between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer about Ukraine, about a trade deal. Where are we with the United States? We're going to have a yak with Yaki in just a minute.
this actually means in some of the key areas. So does that mean, for example, Kev, if you go for an ultrasound or an MRI scan, I hope you don't have to do either of those things, but if you do, are you going to be protected from the radiographer saying, could you be pregnant before you have an ultrasound, or whatever else the test may be? Are we gonna stop all that nonsense, please, or is it going to persist?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we know in the last hour or so the Prime Minister has spoken to Donald Trump, and President Trump and Keir Starmer, we've had a little readout from Downing Street. A spokesman said the leaders began by discussing the ongoing and productive discussions between the United Kingdom and the United States on trade. The Prime Minister reiterated his commitment to free and open trade and the importance of protecting the national interest. The leaders also discussed the situation in Ukraine, Iran, and recent action taken against the Houthis in Yemen. They agreed to stay in touch. Well, Donald Trump, certainly on the Ukraine matter, is perhaps taking the foot off the gas a little bit. Let's remind ourselves of what the Secretary of State, their Foreign Secretary essentially, Marco Rubio, said earlier today.
But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well. I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on.
Well, Donald Trump has been asked about what Marco Rubio has said. He has said, I think we have a good chance of ending the war. Let's talk to Michael Yaki. He's a US political analyst and former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She was, of course, the Speaker of the House of Representatives for many years. Michael, thanks for joining us this evening. I hope you're well. And I just wondered where you think things are in regard to Ukraine, what the appetite is, both from the White House and indeed from Congress, to try and get this over the line, because Rubio's statement certainly is something different, I think anyway, from what we've heard previously.
Well, thank you, Peter, and happy Easter to you and all your viewers. I think that, well, first of all, the question is Marco Rubio really in charge, right? There's this whole question about whether or not he's actually running foreign policy for the United States, or if it's the special envoy Witkoff. These are the kinds of things that before we used to have Kremlin readers, now we have to have someone who's reading America, which is kind of unusual in terms of who is really speaking for the United States. Clearly, you would think would be the president, and you would think through the president would be the Secretary of State, but it's not always quite clear. Witkoff has been to Moscow now 3 times to speak with Putin. I think Rubio's only been once. Rubio is now part of this sort of off the shoulder, pull over to the side of the road discussion with Macron and with the Prime Minister and with Germany about is there a role for Europe in these discussions. But what you heard on the tarmac today is something I don't think anyone's ever heard before, which is America has a short attention span when it comes to foreign policy, and if we don't get something done right in the next few days, we're just going to move on, whatever that move on is. And one of the things I think that would be of some concern to Ukraine was Mark Rubio's offhand comment later on to say, well, we might help in the margins. I mean, what does that mean? Does we send a box of plasters to the front? Sure. Or are we going to turn the intelligence back on, which we don't know if it's on or off, in terms of what Ukraine has access to for their targeting? Because this is the spring. It's the spring offensive. This is what always happens in in Eastern Europe is that this is a time when people attack.
I just want to dip into what the president is saying right now in the White House. I think it's a swearing-in ceremony, but he's taking a couple of questions from reporters. Let's just hear what President Trump is saying right now.
Filed for a protective order from him and said he was violent and abusive and really scary, including allegations that he punched and scratched her on the eye, left her bleeding.
He's obviously not talking about Ukraine there, but if he is, and if he takes more questions, we will we'll dip into that. But Michael, away from Ukraine on a trade deal, here in the UK, there's so many people, the businesses just want a bit of certainty, especially businesses that are exporting to the United States. Those tariffs have been essentially suspended largely for many countries for 90 days. I just wonder what appetite and what focus and what I suppose what bandwidth the Trump White House has to sort all of it out in such a relatively short space of time.
Well, I mean, and that's sort of the issue that you sort of saw with Marco Rubio, which is there are a lot of things on a lot of plates that are spinning in the air. One of them, and this has global implications, and certainly what you saw last week for the global economy was tariffs, and the fact that there's a 90-day suspension of the new tariffs doesn't mean that the tariffs on cars, aluminum, steel still aren't in effect. But and then he walked back sort of the tariff issue on semiconductors. But I think if I'm the PM, I'm just trying to get some kind of a read from Donald Trump about what does he really mean, because as you know, as we've spoken about on this program before, Peter, there's really not much of a trade deficit between the United States and the UK. It's a very strong, very even relationship. People may complain about the VAT here and there, but the fact is that in terms of import exports, it's pretty free and fair already. So targeting the UK has never made much sense. I think that the PM needs to continue to reach out, needs to continue to sort of handhold and see what's going on, because it has an enormous impact, as we all know, on both our stock markets, on the international stock market, on just how people are going to choose where and when to invest, and that has an enormous impact on both countries and which serve as financial centers for the world.
And really, I suppose this does need to be sorted, certainly. I just wonder what pressure, if any, he's being put under by Congress in this, on the American people as well, and what real people on the ground think about this.
I think that there are so many things going on in the United States right now that we can barely touch on all of them. When you talk about the massive cuts to our federal government, something that no one has ever seen, and the ripple effects of that won't begin to be felt probably for a few months, but they will start to be felt. You can't just dismantle a bureaucracy like Social Security, which tens of millions of Americans rely on, and expect nothing is going to go wrong. Just like that poor guy who's in Venezuela, something is going to go wrong, and it will go wrong. I mean, that's just the nature of how this goes. But can any one thing be focused on by the American people right now? I'm not sure. It's not going to happen until there's actual real pain on a broad level to the Americans. Otherwise, what you saw was pain on Wall Street communicating up to get the tariffs paused for 90 days.
And presumably the American public is not just quite as excited as Donald Trump is about his second state visit to the United Kingdom. I was invited by the King and the great country. It is beautiful, Trump told reporters. I don't know how it can be bigger than the last one. The last one was incredible, but they say the next one will be even more important. Classic Trump language there.
More horses. Just put more horses out in front of Buckingham. So if you can double the number of royal British, knights riding through in front of Trump, then he'll be able to say it was twice as big as it was last time.
Yes, indeed. I'm not sure his estimation of numbers is always entirely accurate.
Just have them ride back and forth twice, and that'll be enough. So,
Michael, thank you. I appreciate that. That's Michael Yaki, who is a US political analyst. He's a former senior advisor to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi as well. She was, of course, the Speaker of the House of Representatives for many years. And yeah, the invitation to visit the UK apparently is going to happen in September, according to Donald Trump. Trump, so that to look forward to. Certainly his second state visit. I wonder what the trade relationship will be like at that time. We're going to talk more about this eyesight issue. Quite a few people getting in touch about this. We'll reflect your views on that in the next hour. We'll also talk about the Chagos Islands. People who have been in Mauritius for many years unlikely to go home under the UK deal. We'll talk about the Easter travel mayhem as well. I know at least some of our listeners are on their way away for the Easter holidays, and of course about those teachers being assaulted as well in classrooms. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'm here for another hour until 7 o'clock. Plenty to talk about in that time. Then Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 9 in this studio, and then with What Just Happened between 9 and 10. I'm back tomorrow as well between 10 and 1, and on Sunday between 10 and 1, and on Monday between 10 and 1. A very happy Easter to you and indeed to me. We'll be talking in a second about 2 in 5 teachers who have been assaulted as classroom violence surges. We'll talk about a coroner who has warned over 2 million drivers with failing eyesight, and the Chagos Islanders unlikely to go home under a UK deal with Mauritius. We'll also reflect on the travel chaos that is happening up and down the country as people try to get away for Easter. Maybe you're stuck in that traffic. Maybe you're someone who shouldn't be driving or has been told recently not to drive. 0344 499 1000. I'd love to hear from people who are the impact of the coroner's words has had on them. I'd love to hear what they have to say. We're also talking about military accommodation as well. A number of people getting in touch about that. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on the main number, which is of course 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss between now and 7. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, some really, really disturbing statistics that have come from one of the teaching unions, the NASUWT, one of the really big ones, and they have surveyed their members, and 2/5 of teachers say they have been physically assaulted by pupils in the last year, some of them with knives and fire extinguishers among the weapons used to attack them. One teacher was injured and lost consciousness after a pupil threw a laptop at her head, and 20% of respondents said they'd experienced being hit or punched by pupils in the last year. 38% saying they'd been shoved or barged. And get this, half of threats against teachers came from children in primary school. Well, Chris McGovern is the chairman for the Campaign for Real Education. Chris, were you ever threatened or indeed punched or attacked as a teacher?
No, I wasn't actually, though I did work in some very large schools of 2,000. If anything, I had parents on my side. I remember once working in Yorkshire, a miner's son, slightly problematic, when at parents' evening, his father told me, he said, look, any problems with my lad, just stamp on his fingernails. Now, I didn't agree with that, of course, but that was parental support. These days, though, it's a gathering storm. We talked about it in the past, and we will talk about it again. It is getting worse. And you've got to remember, in primary schools in particular, 9 out of 10 teachers are women. They're a majority in secondary school. They tend to be more vulnerable than men. But it is a crisis, not in all schools, but in some schools. And we're going to have to do something about it.
Yeah, and what can be done about it? Because, who is to blame for this? Obviously, it's the children who are making the threats and are attacking the teachers. But what can the schools do about it? What should they do? And the parents as well?
Well, a start obviously could be made by banning smartphones. That would help. A start could also be made by making the curriculum more relevant, particularly to those older teenagers who perhaps need a vocational course rather than an academic course. But I think, we talked too much about inclusion. We need to talk for once about exclusion. We need to back our teaching profession. If I had my way, we'd bring back reform schools, which were disappeared, I think, in the 60s, where children who were troublemakers would go. It's like a state boarding school. Borstal, we still have those in India. In India, in 8 states, they have Borstal. And very little reoffending after that. It sounds very harsh, but it produced Brendan Behan, after all. Borstal Boy, famous book, great writer. It did reform people. Not necessarily him, of course, but it does reform people. You've got to get tough. That doesn't mean to say you throw difficult children on the scrap heap. You don't. It's the last thing you do, but you've got to protect the majority. So we need to get tough on this. Look, we had a teacher murdered in the classroom a few years ago. So it's a real problem. And we talk about it each year, and it gets worse each year. But I would say you've got to look at the curriculum. You've got to ban smartphones. And also, by the way, good teachers tend to have far fewer problems.
Why smartphones particularly? How would that help the problem in your estimation, Chris?
Well, they're used for bullying. They're also used for not only pupils, they're also used for bullying teachers. So you'll find that children, I remember 15 years ago as a head teacher, I had a case, one of the very few cases I had to deal with in this particular line, where a teacher had been filmed by a pupil. And that was then put on the internet, on the web, and so forth. It was after that I banned smartphones. That's 15 years ago or so, more than that, in fact. I banned smartphones altogether. They can be used to bully teachers, and they can soak up other people's resentment of teachers and so forth. So, Australia has banned social media and so forth for young people. Most of Europe now is banning the phones. Our spineless government are very reluctant to take any action about that.
They say, though, in the government's defence, they say that most schools have banned them anyway.
Yeah, but not all. And they're not because of the government. The government supported that. They say that, indeed they do, but not all schools. It's out of control. Then we need to support parents. Parents need to be able to say to their children, to their infants, you can't have a smartphone because the government won't let you have one. We ban alcohol. Well, smartphones are far more dangerous than alcohol. Under 18, you may not buy alcohol, you may not smoke. We need to apply the same rules to these smartphones. It sounds incredibly tough, but we don't have a choice, Peter. It's going to get worse. We've got to attract teachers into the profession. People aren't joining the profession and particularly
or staying very long when they're in the profession, and that is a major issue because people qualify, see what it's like, see how out of control things are. The people I worry about as well are the well-behaved children who, you know and I know, if there's even one very disruptive child in a class, it can really negatively affect the education of every other child in that class, including those who do all their homework, turn up on time, turn up on the uniform and in their uniform and do exactly what they're told.
Yeah, this is the tragedy. And of course, you know, we've got to look after our children and our economy. Our economy depends on a successful education system. I've often said, you want to see our economy in 20 years' time, look at our schools today. There's a problem. We do need to protect the majority. We can't sort of, throw the minority on one side totally, but we need to exclude them if they're misbehaving. But today, my voice is a voice in the wilderness. When I say exclude, I'm told, oh, no, you must exclude anybody. And schools are under pressure to include everybody. No, if children can't behave, have them out, send them to places which can help them, but protect the majority.
Chris, let me talk to you about the teachers who say they will strike this autumn to make Labour MPs pay unless they get more cash. This is the boss of the National Education Union. In recent days, they have labelled Nigel Farage and Reform UK racist. I think they're wrong to do so, but they are Britain's biggest education union. They've threatened strikes unless they get more pay. This is the General Secretary, Daniel Kebede, accusing ministers of betraying teachers with a 2.8% pay recommendation. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Well, first of all, schools should not be preaching politics, and it's delusional to suggest that any political party or mainstream political party in Britain today is what this union is saying they are. I mean, we're not a party or political organisation. I don't belong to any political party, but it is illegal to promote political propaganda and to preach hatred in schools against what many people are very concerned about the state of our politics, and that should not be there's no place in the classroom. It wasn't so long ago at a Labour Party conference that a teacher delegate stood up and told the Labour Party people there that as long as one child left school and voted Conservative, education system was failing. There is an issue here. Politics should not be intruding whatsoever. So, you know, I'm not a member of the Reform Party and not a member of any party, but we've got to keep politics out of the classroom. And the kids need to. And actually, one good news about this, Peter, is that children, in my experience, particularly young teenagers and so on, they don't take that lightly. They will vote the opposite way. You tell the kid, don't vote Reform. It's going to be a great boost for Reform. So that's how you boost the Reform vote. It just shows you how nonsensical some of these union leaders are. And as far as money goes, well, we spend more money on education than most countries around the world. There's plenty of money in the current budget. The majority of staff in schools are not teachers. They are support staff. We need to reduce the number of support staff, pay more money to the teachers. And by reducing the number of support staff, it means we've got to get rid of about half of the classroom assistants. The classroom assistants lower standards because what they do, they work in the classroom in groups. We don't have whole class teaching with a teacher at the front teaching 30 kids. We have 3 or 4 groups in the classroom, and that's a very ineffective way of teaching. It's only made possible because we have classroom assistants. There are some great classroom assistants. We need some, particularly for special needs children, but halve the number and with the money saved, pay good teachers what they deserve. Teachers do deserve a good pay rise, and I would support the union on that, but I would say it's within the current budget. But who's thinking this, Peter? They don't think out of the box. I've been saying this for years. And, you know, I remember David Blunkett, who was probably the only education secretary I ever worked with, who was actually any good. He went to a National Union of Teachers conference, and for his own safety, he had to be hidden in a broom cupboard. That's what it's like in those union conferences. And when journalists go there, they're completely shocked. But to be fair, most teachers, most of the time, are doing the best they can, and those union leaders do not represent them.
Just on children's and indeed teachers' safety, Gary has been in touch. He sent me a WhatsApp on 0344 499 1000. He said, Peter, is it time for teachers to wear body cams, classrooms to have CCTV, and parents to be made jointly responsible for their children's behaviour? If your child assaults a teacher, you should end up in the dock. What do you make of that, Chris, just going back to our discussion a few minutes ago?
Yeah, well, in Scotland a few weeks ago, the teachers were asking for lessons in self-defence. Yeah. They should certainly have buzzers where they can summon help. I mean, I don't think body armour is going to help particularly. If we're in a situation where teachers need body armour, we may as well close the schools down. Forget it.
There are schools that have knife arches, for example. You know this better than I do. There are schools that have police officers there that do searches.
We have airport security in some schools. That's necessary. But when teachers start wearing body armor and stuff, the system is completely broken. No, I say if you've got the children who have got problems, you deal with severely. We need more men in teachers as well, and in teaching. There's not enough men doing it, you know. And that's not to say there aren't fantastic women teachers, of course.
No, I totally get what you're saying, and so many children need male role models just as they need good female role models as well. How do you encourage men into teaching, do you think, Chris?
Well, first of all, you pay them well. I mean, you do need to pay good teachers a good salary. And you've got to sell it well. And if you're in teaching, you're likely to be assaulted. You're not going to go into the profession. Too many teachers are worried, particularly working in primary schools, that they'll be associated with the craze about paedophilia and so forth. That it's working in mature. Look, I worked most of my career, a lot of my career in secondary schools. I finished in a primary school, both very enriched. It is a great job, by the way. It's an energizing job. It's a fantastic job. But we must reward teachers well. And we've got to sell the positive points of it. And that means you've got to support the profession. You mustn't have a situation where teachers can be assaulted. If they are assaulted, the child has to be excluded. So to bring men in, and also women as well, good women, we need to think more about exclusion rather than only about inclusion, which is what I said earlier.
Yeah. Chris, thank you for your thoughts this tea time. That is Chris McGovern there. He's the chairman of the Campaign for Real Education. What do you think about this? Maybe you're a teacher who's off now, off for Easter. Maybe you're someone who, as a parent, and you've had maybe a child in your child's classes or your grandchild's class that's been very disruptive or threatened a teacher. I'd be really interested to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and in fact in the break I'm just going to go on Twitter and have a look at what people have been saying on there, maybe read a few of those out after the break. You can send me a WhatsApp or a WhatsApp voice message on 0344 499 1000 and the same number, as I say, to give me a ring as well. In a second we'll talk about something that you've been reacting to as well, which is a coroner's warning over 2 million drivers with failing eyesight. Who should be on the roads and why? Interested to hear from you on this as well. Again, that number 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk.
Hospitals will have to get their acts together to think about how to ensure that spaces are safe for biological women, but also appropriate.
You don't have to call them that anymore, you just call them women.
I'm trying to be politically correct.
No, not anymore. You don't have to be. The law's changed. You don't have to be politically correct. You're breaking the law if you're being politically correct.
But I can still be respectful for those who...
You can be, but I think it's disrespectful to women to call them biological women. Call them women.
So, OK, I'm happy to do that. So, for women to be respected on wards...
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Jason, who has messaged me to say, Chris McGovern, every single word, why isn't the man Education Secretary? And quite a few messages on the coroner's warning over 2 million drivers with failing eyesight. This came after an inquest in Preston, which was told how 4 people had died in traffic collisions. All of them were in advancing years. Mary Cunningham, 79, Grace Folds, 85, Anne Ferguson, 75, and Peter Westwell, 80, died in traffic collisions. And the coroner at the time, Dr. James Adley, the senior coroner for Lancashire, has written to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, after hearing that more than 2 million motorists with bad eyesight could still be driving in the UK. He has written these 4 fatalities, the ones I mentioned a second ago, shared the same feature, that the driver's sight was well below the standard required to drive a car. So what is the system? How is it working or not working? Tom's been in touch. He said I have pretty good eyesight, but I choose the radio over the telly at any time, and especially enjoy listening to you. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Tom. And yes, a lot of people do the same thing in regard to listening to the radio. Anne in Yorkshire says, my husband was advised by an A&E doctor not to drive for 3 months due to fainting. So he surrendered his licence. He drives for a living. He was very lucky not to lose his job, considering it took the doctor a year to sign the form so he could have his licence back. He had to get our MP involved. It was Rishi Sunak, or he could still be waiting, says Anne in Yorkshire. What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Let's hear from an expert. That's Brian Gregory, who is the Policy Director at the Alliance of British Drivers. Brian, everybody knows, we've been talking about it in the office here actually, everybody knows someone who's been on the roads or is on the roads who really shouldn't be, but it's such a difficult discussion to have with especially elderly people who guard their independence so incredibly closely, and I'm sure I'll do exactly the same thing when I'm at that time of life as well. How do we solve this or deal with it responsibly, Brian?
I think what we have to realise is when you actually look at accident causation, and forget about the things that are said about speed kills, because speed's a long way down the list of causes, and only about 2 or 3% of accidents are actually caused by illegal speed.
A lot of it is carelessness or not driving safely, isn't it?
The biggest 3 causes are did not look but did not see, or failed to judge the path or speed of the other vehicle or other road user, right? So they're all observation factors. So clearly, if your observation powers are poor, that makes you a bigger candidate for having an accident. So you need to be sure your eyesight's good. I mean, I had mine checked, not this year, it was late last year, but my glasses prescription was changed to suit distance driving. So I have a different pair of glasses, 2 pairs of prescription sunglasses, ordinary prescription glasses, and the glasses have got anti-glare coating on. So
I have those on my glasses. I have those on my glasses as well for driving at night, and it helps you with the street lights and everything. But really, I only wear glasses for driving and things that are far away. But there are a lot of people, especially older people, and there's no real onus on them to check their eyesight. I mean, most people will go, who have any form of eyesight deficiency, will go to the optician every 2 years. They ask you back and all the rest of it. But Britain's licensing system is apparently the laxest in Europe, and one of only 3 countries to rely on self-reporting of visual conditions affecting the ability to drive. There's a fine balance to be struck, I would argue, between people saying actually there should be some sort of test, because there are loads of people who drive perfectly safely well into their 90s.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But you need to have the test to be sure of that, because we don't want, as this ophthalmologist, as he was saying, we don't basically want 2 million Mr. Magoos driving around in the country, because it's a recipe for accidents.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What should we do about this, do you think? What is a responsible way forward on this to make sure that people who are older, and indeed just people of any age who have bad eyesight, are either not driving, or if they are driving, they're driving safely?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think we need public information films telling people that, you know, the biggest causes of accidents are down to observation, not speeding, because as I say, when you look at the stats, speeding is quite low. It's the observation factors, because if you're not observing properly, you won't observe hazards developing, you won't respond to those developing hazards, and you won't take the necessary avoiding action if you didn't see them in the first place.
I don't know if you've ever done this yourself, Brian, but I was talking to someone earlier on about how sometimes, you know, the younger person kind of becomes the adult in the relationship, and sometimes you have to have a conversation with an older family member about driving. I mean, what would you kind of recommend in terms of how people have that conversation?
It's a very difficult conversation to have, and somebody will probably have to have that conversation with me in, you know, 10 or 15 years. But I think you have to point out that they're not just a danger to themselves, but they're a danger to others.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
It's a very difficult conversation on many occasions. Do you think Dr. James Adley, the senior coroner for Lancashire, has a point here? Do you think he's right to raise this as an issue?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because, as I said, the biggest causes of accidents, precipitating factors, are down to observation.
Yeah.
And if your observation powers are deteriorating, then that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Brian. That's Brian Gregory there. He's Policy Director of the Alliance of British Drivers. John's on the line from Merseyside. John's given me a ring from that area, 0344 499 1000. John, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you think?
Well, good evening to you.
Good evening.
I appreciate my old good old dad, like bless his soul, he'd be quite happy toddling alone. Not this day and age, the way people drive. But the thing that concerns me is I've got 2 grandchildren, then 13/14. But because they spend so much time on these Xboxes, and then they obviously want to have a car. And does that actually fuel their minds when they get behind a wheel of a car, or is their eyesight not the same as watching a screen?
Well, it's a really interesting point, actually, John, and certainly young people's eyesight. Well, you do have the test. When you take the driving test, you've got to, I think it's 20 metres away, you've got to be able to read a...
But that was only like to read registration plate, wasn't it?
That's right.
I passed my test. I'm at 66 now.
Yeah.
But the way they zoom in on a screen, which everything's in, whether it's just a smart TV or whatever it may be. But when they get older, surely that must burn something away for them, because they're not out doing their own thing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You may end up, because they may be watching whatever.
Yeah, well, that may well have... That may well have a negative effect on their eyesight. Certainly, John, thank you for your thoughts there. That's John in Merseyside. And Nick's been in touch from Riversdale in the Western Cape. I'm pretty sure I was in Riversdale on one occasion during my gap year when I worked in South Africa. And Nick says, in South Africa it's mandatory to have an eye test every 5 years when you have to renew your driving licence. And yeah, I certainly remember... A big story I covered actually for the Cape Argus in Cape Town was how you just got a driving licence in South Africa, I remember that, and you had to renew it, and a lot of people didn't renew it, and there were a lot of people who couldn't drive as a result. It wasn't, in this country I think it's every 10 years you've got to renew your driving licence. I still have a Northern Irish one actually, so I think we have a couple more calls on driving licences. Claire in the World is waiting to talk about teachers. Shall we take another call on driving licences, on driving first of all from the people who've just called in, or shall we go to Claire? What would you like to do, Ryan? Oh, okay. We'll go to Claire. And Claire is in the Wirral, and Claire has given me a shout on children attacking teachers. Claire, you're very welcome to the programme. What's your point on that?
Thank you, Peter, and happy Easter.
Happy Easter, Claire.
Thank you. I think that, I do agree with Chris McGovern. I think that we do need to get tough in schools. But I would go one further and say that the trouble is that children have no punishment at home. Yeah. You know, we've got very soft on children's behaviour. And, after all, at the end of the day, we're all part of nature. Mm-hmm. And if we look at nature, we look at the chimps or we look at the lions, if their cubs or their offspring get out of hand, they're just given a swift little, tap with the paw or whatever.
Well, my cat does that to me when I'm out of line and don't feed him early enough in the morning, certainly. So that is nature for you.
Good for him. Yeah.
It's true though, as you say, and actually, you know, I've said this throughout the programme, Claire, but there really are, I know quite a few teachers, my parents were teachers, and I know quite a few teachers, and they will say, you know, the kids are bad, but the parents are often worse, and they put so many demands on teachers. They want little Johnny or little you know, Joan to be the most amazing person and the most incredible student, but at the same time, when it comes to discipline, often they don't back the teacher up and will take the child's side, and sometimes that's appropriate, but a lot of the time, you know, the teacher's there and knows what to say and what to do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, because now that, you know, that you can't touch your children, I think children have got out of hand, basically. And children know that there's no recourse if they cause trouble or disturbance. And children are now growing up with no respect for authority.
Yeah.
The police are seen as soft and rainbow-coloured and seen as a joke. And children know that they can get away with things. So, you know, it is getting out of hand. And also, as Chris McGovern says, you know, schools should not be indoctrinating our children. You know, children then get a distorted view of society, and their young minds can't cope with what's being pushed onto them, basically.
And certainly when they have their own children, if they haven't ever been told no, and they haven't ever been told, well, actually, no, this person is correct and this person is the authority figure, and they will decide. I mean, I've heard, I'm not a parent, but I've heard many very good parents say, you know, we're doing this, and the child says why, and said, well, because I'm your dad or because I'm your mum and what I say goes, and this is the way things happen. And kids need to be told that. And if you have a teacher who is, this phrase, in loco parentis, in the place of a parent, well, they need to be respected too, don't they?
Yeah, and also I must admit that parents very often nowadays, they do take the side of their children, you know, rather than sort of years ago, they'd always the parents would respect the teacher's point of view and would stand by the teacher more often than not. I'm not saying that the teacher is always right.
Sure.
But very often now they do take the opposite view and they will stand with their children. So that's not actually teaching the children to actually...
and respect authority. Yeah.
Respect authority. Yeah. And if you can't reason with children, where is the next recourse? There's no recourse. And that's where, you know, society has, you know, we've got in a bit of a mess in a lot of ways.
You speak a lot of sense, Claire. That's Claire in the World there. Thank you for that. Jason says, imagine a country where we have the likes of Peter Blexley in charge of crime, Chris McGovern in charge of education, Carol Sikora in charge of health, etc. Imagine how good Britain could be. Dawn says, hi Peter, I wonder if cannabis and cocaine use is a big accident factor. Perhaps we need statistics on this as well as the eyesight issue. It's a very, very good point, Dawn. I would imagine those statistics do exist. I just don't know what they are. But certainly drug use is a big thing. And especially when you hear about people who are smokers being victimised, I would argue, and these ideas of banning smoking even around pubs or even in public. Well, what about the law that's there already, which is that you can't smoke cocaine in public because guess what? You can't smoke cannabis in public because guess what? It's illegal. When is that ever enforced? I know there are so many people, you walk down the street and you know the smell immediately. Back to driving, and Roy has given me a ring from Canada. Roy, whereabouts in Canada are you?
I'm in Calgary.
Calgary. Well, thanks for the call. Really appreciate it. Tell me what happens there in regard to eyesight and drivers.
Well, once you get to 80, you have to have a full medical and an eyesight test and a reflex test.
Can I ask you, Roy? Are you above 80? Have you been through all this?
I'm 84.
Okay. So what was it like for you then? Was it all straightforward? Was it all okay? You still driving?
I'm still driving, and so they give you a thorough check, eyesight.
And do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that's a reasonable thing to do?
I think it's very reasonable because of also it takes the burden from your family having to tell you to stop driving.
And this is twice a year, is that right?
No, every 2 years. Every 2 years.
Every 2 years. Every 2 years. Okay. And Roy, how long have you lived in Canada?
15 years.
Okay. So it's a great place to live, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And when you're out driving and so on, do you see people your age on the roads, or do you see people who are perhaps older and things, and do you feel safe there, safer than perhaps you would in the UK?
Very safe because of this rule.
Yeah, yeah. So you support it. I mean, at some stage, Roy, there may well be, you know, if a doctor says to you, actually, hold on a second, Roy, you can't drive any longer. I mean, that presumably will be a very hard thing for you to accept when or if it happens.
Of course it will, but then that's the way things are.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been through this process twice then, if you're 84, is that correct?
Sorry?
You've been through this process twice, have you, if you're 84?
Twice already.
Sorry?
Twice, and
yeah,
it just improves the safety on the roads.
Excellent stuff. Well, Roy, thanks for that perspective, that international perspective. Really appreciate it. Where are you from in the UK, Roy?
I come from Kent, Maidstone.
Good stuff. All right, thanks very much indeed for the call, Roy. Thanks for watching and listening as well all the way out there in Canada. I know we have loads of different viewers and listeners right around the world, and I'd love to hear more international examples before 7 o'clock or whatever the time is in your time zone. We have about 25 minutes left of this programme before Kevin O'Sullivan comes up. I'm back tomorrow, Sunday, and indeed Monday between 10 and 1 as well. Kevin's going to be in the studio between 7 and 9, this studio, and then with what just happened between 9 and 10 as well. Lots more to discuss, and if you want to do get in on driving, feel free to give me a ring. We're also going to talk about the Chagos Islanders unlikely to go home under a UK deal with Mauritius. Sean Bell's coming up in a second, and the Easter travel mayhem. Maybe you're on the road right now. If it's legal and safe to do so, tell me how you're getting on. Just send me a text message if you are maybe a passenger in a car, and you can send me a text message and tell me how you're getting on, where you are and what you're up to. 0344 499 1000 for WhatsApps, and of course if you're texting, it's 87222 with the word talk in your text. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch. We'll definitely get to more calls between now and 7. Lots of people getting in touch on this eyesight issue as well. But I want to talk about something else that affects us here in the UK, even though it's actually the main people involved are many, many thousands of miles away. This is the Chagos Islanders, the Chagosians, and Mauritius apparently unlikely to return any Chagosians to their homeland once the islands are ceded by Britain. The government's admitted that. Mauritius will face very significant logistical challenges in resettling the outer islands of the Chagos archipelago. And it's interesting from that perspective because the Chagosians who are on Mauritius have actually been banned for the last 4 years from even putting forward the thought, even saying in public that the Chagos Islands should remain British. In the 60s and 70s, Britain, which does not have a good record on this, expelled about 1,500 Chagosians from their homeland to build that US military base on Diego Garcia, which is the largest atoll on the island chain. And at the time, British officials dismissed the Chagosians as, and I quote, a few Tarzans and Man Fridays. The Chagosians were forcibly transferred to Mauritius and the Seychelles. And decades later, we're now in a situation where Chagosians and their descendants still live in destitution in a place called Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius, and complain of suffering discrimination from the majority ethnically Indian population. Now, as part of this deal, we're going to give 90 million a year, rising with inflation for 99 years, to lease Diego Garcia, maintaining the military base. And theoretically, the Chagosians have been told they'll be able to resettle the outer islands in the archipelago. They've also been told they will be compensated, although there's a bit of ambiguity around all of that. Sean Bell is a military analyst and a former fighter pilot himself. Sean, the Chagosians, it would appear, again, are being treated badly. We treated them badly in the 60s and 70s. Now it seems the Mauritians are treating them pretty badly as well.
Yeah, it is a complicated story. As you said, Peter, we didn't cover ourselves in glory. It is worth remembering that back in the 1700s, these were the property of France. They ceded them to us in 1814, and it was only in the 1960s when, we wanted to, with the US, build a military base there. And of course, as that base got built, it became evident that you couldn't really have the locals living there. And so in 1971, the population was pushed out. The real issue here actually has been, over the years, the Mauritians have been trying to bring a sort of sovereignty dispute against the UK, and we've actively stopped them doing that. But inevitably, eventually, without going through a blow-by-blow history, the United Nations got involved. They said, actually, the Mauritians have got a case here, and therefore the British government has had to go, we can't spurn the United Nations when actually other nations, when they do something counter to the United Nations, we criticise them. So how do we maintain a presence there? And therefore, part of the deal that's flown from that is a financial deal. It provides Chagosians with a permanent right to settle in the UK, some financial assistance as well. But as you say, it's all about maintaining the sovereignty and the security of this strategically important base at the Chagos Islands, Diego Garcia at the heart of it.
Is there any way that you see that Britain has done well out of this deal, or do you agree with Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, who says when Starmer negotiates, Britain loses?
Well, I think we've got to be very careful. I don't like to get involved in the politics here. I think you can't change history, and we look back and it was the time of empires and the like. What we can do is do the right thing for now. Now, there's no doubt at the moment the Chagosians would much prefer to have the Brits in charge of a long-term lease. The Mauritians are very happy with the financial arrangement. We have an enduring strategic requirement for that area, and therefore this financial package, which has been a long time kept somewhat secret. My concern about the financial package is it looks like it's coming out of the defence budget, which is close to my heart. We are living in a more dangerous world. I would have liked to have not seen that the case. And also the concerns are that we're paying this 90 million potentially a year, but it does appear that the Americans are the ones benefiting the most from this. So what is the internal arrangement between us and America? And of course, in a separate conversation that you'll be having is Trump is doing his own thing on the world stage, trying to create a sort of a fortress America. But actually, things like the Chagos Island demonstrate how actually America is dependent on the UK in a lot of respects for some of the military capabilities around the world.
Yeah. Sean, very interesting to talk to you. Thank you for your analysis of that. That's Sean Bell there, military analyst and former fighter pilot on the Chagosians. Those islanders unlikely to go home under the UK deal with Mauritius. Lots of people getting in touch on driving and eye tests, including Robert in Nottingham, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Robert, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say on this?
Hi, Peter. Great show.
Thank you.
I have an eye condition which I'm obliged to report to DVLA. So every so often I have a field of vision test, which it's usually when my license comes up for renewal. Now, you can get the appointment very quickly, but, the Gov website, says you may be waiting up to 90 days for the result. In fact, my last one took 2.5 months to get the result. Meanwhile, I haven't got a valid driving license.
That's ridiculous. Do you know,
as it happens, I don't have a car at the moment. But so what I'm saying is, if they bring in regular checks, then there needs to be a much quicker system.
Yes.
for assessing. And also the other thing that comes into my mind is who's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, I did a field of vision test. That's free. You don't pay anything for it, actually.
Yes. But an eye test costs money, and well, for most people anyway, it costs money. You're absolutely right. It just popped into my head. Actually, I've forgotten about it. It was during COVID when everybody was working from home and so on, and I was getting my driving license renewed. I had a very minor health condition that had gone away, and it had been reported to the DVLA. I had reported it myself. Then it had gone away, and my doctor had said, got a medical note to say this thing that would have affected my driving, or in theory could have affected my driving. I mean, it never did, but it could have, had gone away. And it took months and months and months and months, and I didn't have a driving license at that time. And you're talking about more serious thing because your car is more important to you than I would imagine driving was to me at that stage anyway. And Robert, the systems have to be in place, don't they? If they change it, they need to prepare for this, and they need to realise this. I mean,
the other thing personally, I wouldn't want to be driving if I wasn't fit to drive. Personally, But so I think, as the coroner said, I think there is a case for actually introducing eyesight checks at some level, anyway. I wouldn't be against that at all.
It was interesting what Roy said a minute ago, that our caller from Canada, who was saying that actually it takes the pressure off the family, because if it's the authority saying sorry, you can't do it. And there was an elderly woman I knew who really shouldn't have been on the road at that stage, and her family slightly forced her into, I mean out of care and out of consideration, but the fact that it was a driving instructor saying, do you know what, you're really, now's the time to stop driving. The authority figure had much more of an impact.
Another aspect, of course, is insurance. If you're driving when you're not fit to, there's an insurance issue as well, isn't there, apart from the safety issue?
Well, indeed, and a lot of people, even just older people, I think it's about 75, your insurance starts to rocket anyway, because it just gets so high. I mean, hopefully this won't happen for a very, very long time, Robert, but at some stage, if someone has a conversation with you or me or whatever when the time comes and says, actually, do you know what, you're not really safe to drive, it's going to be a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it?
I think the other thing that comes to mind there is that what are the alternative transport facilities? If you're living in an area where there's good public transport, it's not so much of a problem, is it? But another issue is, if you've got a sick relative that you need to take to a hospital, there's all that sort of thing wrapped up. If there are other facilities, other bits of infrastructure, then. But if you live out in the sticks, I mean, the guy from Canada might live a long way. You might need to make car
totally.
journeys.
Listen, where my family live in Northern Ireland, for example, a car is an absolute lifeline. There is okay public transport, but I live in London where public transport is fantastic. I find it hilarious when people in London complain about how do we get 9 minutes for a tube? I sort of think, go to the village I lived in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, where I live, there's a fantastic bus service, and I've got a push bike as well. So. For local journeys, I don't need a car actually, because I live on my own, as well. So it all depends, doesn't it? But for a lot of people living in villages in particular, the car is a lifeline.
You're absolutely right, Robert. Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 74 actually.
And you're still on the bike?
Oh, very much so. Every day.
Fantastic, I love it. Well, stay healthy and happy, and with good eyesight, Robert, I hope, for many, many years to come. Good to chat to you. Happy Easter to you as well. That's Robert in Nottingham there. We will talk more about this, and we'll get a travel update from Lisa Minot will be with us in a second. Will be with us in a second to tell us about the Great Easter Getaway. Maybe you're trying to get away yourself. Stay with us here on Talk.
look, I don't know what Mr. Lowe is up to. What I do know is there is a police investigation. I do know that there is an investigation by the parliamentary authorities. Those will sort of carry on follow their course. But bluntly, we're just moving on. We are obviously we're working hard, campaigning around the country. And May the 1st is a very important day for all political parties, including Reform UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Real engineering works, warnings for torrential rain. There are all sorts of ways in which the Great Easter Getaway could be problematic. Lisa Minnow is with us. She's the travel editor of The Sun. Lisa, what's going on the travel situation?
Well, I think the most concerning at the moment is actually the Eurostar. So we're seeing a lot of delays and cancellations because of that trackside fire. And this is obviously a very busy time. 2.2 million of us are going to be going abroad over the Easter weekend. And anything like this is going to sort of cause a really big impact going forward. But the roads in general, apart from a couple of isolated incidents, actually seem to be running quite smoothly now. That's what you'd expect this time of night, though. We're going to see a lot of people on the road over the next 3 days. They're predicting about 18 million tomorrow and about the same on Sunday and Monday. So wherever you're going, make sure you do double check before you go. Check the car, check you've got supplies. It is going to be busy out there.
What's the, if people are jetting away perhaps for a short break over the next few days, what's the situation at the airports there?
Well, things are actually looking okay at the airports. We did have some issues today at Gatwick because a strike called by some ground handlers and check-in staff had only impacted about 50 people who were on strike, and we did see people being drafted in to actually take over. As it stands at the moment, things are running pretty smoothly at both Gatwick and Heathrow. We don't seem to have any problems there at all. Huge number of flights over the next 4 days, about 11,282 flights over the next few days. So it's a huge number of people moving. And basically where they're heading, Spain. Always going to be Spain, Balearics, Canary Islands. I mean, in terms of the short breaks, in terms of city breaks, we're talking about the likes of Dublin, Amsterdam. Interestingly for me as well, actually, Istanbul, really quite popular this year for the break.
Why is that? I'm sure you've been there. Is it a good place to visit?
It's a fabulous place to visit, yes. I mean, beautiful city, lots of history, lots of culture going on there, fabulous food scene, and it's nice and warm at this time of year as well, so it's a great time to go.
Yeah, certainly. Just on the Eurostar, I was on the Eurostar this week actually. Went to Paris for a few days, saw Notre Dame Cathedral, which was absolutely beautiful, all restored. Yeah. Have you been there yourself, Lisa? Have you seen it?
I haven't had a chance yet, but I have seen the images. It does look fabulous, doesn't it?
It's beautiful. It seems so new, and I suppose a bit of an hour, of course, because the horrendous fire. But how it's actually restored, it's interesting actually, because there were some flaws in the Notre Dame original construction. You know, little measurements. There were maybe a couple of centimeters out or whatever. We remember, of course, it was hundreds of years ago that it was done. It wouldn't be done in the same way today. But when they restored Notre Dame Cathedral, they actually did it in exactly the same way as it was originally done. So it's a full restoration. They had the opportunity to make things sort of perfectly different. But I suppose one observation, not just about Notre Dame, but in terms of the Eurostar, which I know that those trains carry between 800 and 1,000 people every time they go across or on quite literally under the sea to France and all the rest of it. I mean, the facilities at St Pancras in London aren't brilliant, are they? They are. I was speaking to a woman from Border Force actually, and she was saying that it's absolutely contingent on the trains going on time, and if they don't, you just get these huge bottlenecks of people. But even though the trains were going on time for me as I was leaving for France, there were people sitting on the floor, they were all over the place, and that was in real contrast to really lovely facilities in Charles de Gaulle in Paris.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a worry because we haven't yet got to the point where we're going to have this new entry-exit system. Now, that's going to have everybody having to have their biometrics taken, their eyes and their fingerprints. And at the moment, although there is an area at St Pancras that's been set aside for that, it used to be a coffee shop, it's now been set aside for that. Excuse me. Really, realistically, I can see there's going to be huge problems when that does come in because there just physically isn't the space there. And that has actually impacted how Eurostar has been able to expand. You know, the likes of, you know, the trains that used to run to Disneyland Paris, to Marseille, they've all gone because we don't have the facilities there to actually have that number of people. And it's such a shame because it is such an amazing service when it runs. And it's a real shame that just because of those capacity constraints, we're not able to have the service that we really deserve.
Lisa, thank you very much indeed. That's Lisa Minow there. She's the travel editor of The Sun. Bring us an update and we'll keep you updated right throughout the weekend with Lisa, I'm sure, and also Simon Calder. The two big travel journalists in this country are going to keep us up to date with what's going on with the travel situation. As Lisa says, 18 million people on the roads tomorrow. And speaking of being on the roads, Denise has sent us a voice note on driving in Spain. This is what Denise has had to say.
Just to say, here in Spain, our driving licenses are with an eye test, a night vision test, and also a reaction test.
Well, that's really interesting, and thank you for sending that voice note in, Denise. I know we have loads of different viewers and listeners right across the world. We heard from Roy, we've heard from Denise in terms of how these things work, and Mark has been in touch as well and says another aspect of the DVLA eyesight test, you have to declare to an insurance company that you have had to have a test regardless of the outcome. Your insurance premiums will go up because you've had that eye test. And certainly, Mark, I think a lot of people will hesitate to do that, and there are all sorts of things that can put your insurance premium up. I know all about it, and certainly I've been in situations where through no fault of my own, I had a woman drove into the back of me one time and I had a claim on the insurance. That put my insurance claim up. I was literally sitting at traffic lights, minding my own business, being a safe driver, and she drove into the back of me, I'm afraid, and then of course thousands of pounds of damage were done to my father's car. Actually, it was all a bit embarrassing and testy, and of course my insurance premiums went up. I was a young driver at the time. It's a very, very interesting point actually as well in terms of who is actually safe on the roads, and certainly with the Easter travel mayhem, the bank holiday travellers, and all the sorts of different ways in which there are problems of people getting away, whether it's rail engineering works, torrential rain as well, ruining those Easter getaways. We're really thinking, I suppose, at the moment a lot about travel, and the fact that travel is such an important part of people's independence and things that people really, really want to do as well. We'll reflect on this on my weekend shows, and certainly I am back, as I say, on tomorrow and indeed on Sunday and on Monday between 10 and 1. So I'm going to be here for 3 days in a row, 5 days of me, and there's lots to discuss. And in fact, on tomorrow's show as well, we're going to be talking about a really interesting thing also to do with transport and travel, which is a charity in Northern Ireland that was brought to my attention by a listener actually who sent it in, and they are talking about HGV drivers. We're talking to an HGV driver a little bit earlier on actually, and it's about their mental health, believe it or not. And if you think about it, if you work alone, if you have long shifts and long nights and you're travelling overnight and so on, and you're at the wheel, well, maybe you are lonely and maybe your mental health isn't fantastic, and perhaps it's something that a lot of people really don't think about that much. Well, we're going to think about it. We're going to talk about it on the show, and we're going to make sure that we reflect those people's experience. And I know, certainly having presented some of the early shows and breakfast and so on, that there are a lot of HGV drivers and so on who do listen to Talk, and you are as welcome on this station as anybody else is, of course, as well. We appreciate all our viewers and listeners, and we appreciate Kevin O'Sullivan, who's coming up between 7 and 10. Kev, what's coming up in your show?
We're going to kick off with the migrant crisis. Big day today. By lunchtime, about 140 had come over. One of them arrived dead. So it's another shocking day on the channel. And actually, that brings, since last Friday, more than 2,000 have come over, and that brings the total for the year to over 9,000.
Doesn't sound as if the gangs are being smashed, does it?
As I keep saying, and what's happening? What is our Prime Minister doing about it? He's on holiday, presumably in Rome, fiddling while it burns. I mean, come on. Also, there's a bit of controversy about the King's Easter message. The Queen's former chaplain, Gavin Ash,